recognition for your service. And for all three of you, we look forward to your continuing contributions to the department. We are very proud of you and we rely on you. And it's not just when we're in crisis, but all the time. And so on behalf of everyone in Pasadena, I would like to add my congratulations for your promotion and recognition today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I would ask that Council Member Madison, who's joined us, if he would like to share anything with the three young men who have been promoted to the rank of captain in the fire department. I know that the council member has the utmost respect for our men and women in uniform.
I do, John, and I'd echo the comments that were made. And, you know, certainly in West Pasadena, we care more than most about fire safety because of the topography that we have. And because of that, the topography and the geography, you know, we actually have 3 of the 8 cities, 8 fire stations in our one district. So congratulations. Look forward to continuing to work with you all and all of the men and women of the fire department. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Council Member. I would simply like to say to Captain Basuto, if the disposition that you shared with my colleagues today in terms of that great smile that you have is how you conduct yourselves on a daily basis, you're going to do well. And maybe before you retire, we'll see you as a chief here in Pasadena or somewhere. I also would like to say to the captains, the new captains, would you be willing to accept a cook-off between the police department and the fire department and help lead that effort to see who would be best? You say, bring it on?
Anytime.
All right. The gauntlet has been laid down. The fire department has accepted it, and the 3 captains will lead the way. Thank you very much for your service.
I have to say that's a little bit unfair competition, man.
It's not a fair fight.
I think the firefighters are they're going to smoke that situation out. I think.
Right now, if you want, right now.
Congratulations.
Council members, I'd just like to say thank you. You know, this is one of the things that I love about being in the fire service is the chance to see 3 outstanding individuals promote to this position. They really are the key to success as fire department operations go. They're the first supervisor that encounters these situations and has to make tough decisions, as we've seen in recent times. I couldn't be more proud to wear the same patch as they do. They're all high performers. They're excellent employees, and I really can't wait to see all the great things that they do, including beating the police department in the cook-off. So thank you all very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Acting Chief Frieders. Always a pleasure to have you come before the council and a committee of the council, in this case, the Public Safety Committee. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
At this point, I'd ask the city manager, is there anything else before we begin the formal aspects of the meeting?
No, sir, other than just to say we will continue to bring new hires and promotions in the police and fire department for introductions to the Public Safety Committee. I think it's a great way for the committee members and the community to see the faces of the people that are out there securing their lives, frankly. So we'll continue this practice on a go-forward basis. And with that, council member, I think you're free to turn to the agenda.
Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is the continued discussion of consideration of civilian police oversight. This committee has reviewed this matter on several occasions, both of late and historically 4 years or more ago. Issues, concerns, edits, observations about that proposal. And this is an opportunity for this committee to weigh in again before the mayor decides when to bring it back to the full council, I hope, for a thumbs up or thumbs down. As you know, I asked the mayor to really co-head this effort with me. Not to our delight, we've been accused of interesting things, but this is the light for us to make sure that the full rays of your comments and eyes are before our community addressing the very serious issues. So as the co-author of that proposal, Mayor Terry Tronick, I would ask you if you would like to tee this matter up. If not, we'll go and just directly to our colleagues for comments or way forward. So I'd invite you first, Mayor Terry Tronick, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You sort of presented the status of where we are. I would say that there's been a tremendous public comment on this matter, and we have more apparently for us today. Several of our colleagues are reaching out to their district constituencies to gain suggestions and insight on the matter before it comes back to the council. I would tell you that the focus of most of the comments that I have received have been in two areas. One relates to the composition of the committee. It's been suggested that it would be beneficial to have a greater community representation on the committee. And there have been several specific proposals that have been made that are, I think, really interesting. One is that we should parallel the format of the Northwest Commission, which, as you know, has, rather than one representative from each district, has two representatives from District 1, 3, and 5, and then one representative from each of the other 4 districts and one from the mayor, and along with some community organization representation has been suggested to supplement that. It's also been suggested that the council should use the format for committee selection that we do when we select an interim city council member. So it's a very public process. People apply for the position and they are vetted in public so that the community has an opportunity to see exactly what each applicant brings to the party. And it's also been suggested, interestingly, we had proposed that there'd be required training for members of the commission. It's been suggested that the training would be a prerequisite for an application being considered. So the training wouldn't be completed after selection, but rather as a prerequisite for selection. So that anybody that wanted to apply to be a member of the commission would have already done the training. So those are the kinds of suggestions that have been brought to me and some of our colleagues. On the subject of the independent auditor, most of the discussion has focused on the appropriate venue for that auditor to be located, to be housed. There's been suggestions by Councilmember Hampton, Vice Mayor Hampton, that a separated office of the prosecutor might be the right venue. And I think I'm hopeful that we'll talk about that today. It's been suggested that if the functions are not separated, that it could be put in the city attorney's office. It's been suggested that, and of course the suggestion is that it be in the suggestion, the proposal has it in the city manager's office. But the locus of that function is of great interest to people, as is the continued discussion about the importance of and requirement for a subpoena power, which I'd also like to explore today to get more clarity on that. But so those are the areas of discussion in reporting back to the committee that I've been getting the majority of the comments on. I think it would be useful, Mr. Chair, if we heard from our colleagues on the committee in terms of what recommendations, if any, they have for modifications to the proposal or suggestions for additional inquiry, because I think that would be a productive use of our time today.
Thank you, Mayor. I would invite any of my colleagues who would like to share their thoughts unvarnished, or as they wish. Mr. Madison.
Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really don't have any comments on the so-called Tornick Kennedy, or is it Kennedy Tornick? I can't recall. I reject that construct. There aren't 5 votes for the Tornick Kennedy proposal. There are a number of thoughtful ideas that are percolating around the community, and I look forward to the council coming together around a proposal that's not developed by 2 members in a room somewhere, but rather is developed in the open in our public process. And it's pretty clear to me that that hasn't happened yet. So I'm going to reject the mayor's notion that we're somehow required to make modifications to 1 member or 2 members' proposal. And again, I do look forward to working together to come up with something that won't be a Tornick or a Kennedy or a Gordo, but it'll be a Pasadena city policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to do what my first mind was to refute your way of characterizing. I've already done that. I appreciate the fact that you have a voice to speak your mind, and I'll leave it at that. Are there any other comments from my colleagues related to the continued discussion of consideration of civilian police oversight? Might I add that the characterization of Tornick Kennedy proposal is one way forward, but the business is crafted in such a way to all of my colleagues that and I remind you, it says continued discussion of consideration of civilian police oversight. So nothing is in stone. Each member of this committee certainly has the ability to make a recommendation, offer comments, insights, and to share their views. So you are correct. You do not have to adopt any view. You can have your own view, but this is the time and place, if you have a view, to share that view. It is not the only venue to share that view, because we do have the city council meeting to share your concerns, views, objections, etc. So with that, I'd ask, are there any other members of the Public Safety Committee who would like to voice any comment or concerns or a possible pathway forward?
I definitely would like a pathway forward, and I would like to hear the public speakers before asking any more questions about
Thank you.
how we proceed.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor. I would simply like to say from the outset, I do think that Councilmember McAustin's suggestion about 50% of the commissioners, if there are commissioners, be women. I think that's an excellent idea, and I'd hope that as we fashion a way forward on the issue of civilian or community police oversight, that we'd give strong consideration as a body. Contrary to the comments that were made by Councilmember Madison, I believe there are 5 votes to construct a way forward by the whole council, and I'm looking forward to hopefully doing that in the full light of day. With that, Mr. or Ms. City Clerk, I would ask how many speaker cards do we have or comments on this particular issue?
Hi, we have received 20 public comments.
Okay, and are all 20 of those comments distinct?
Yes. Valerie and I will both be reading. Valerie will read the first 10, then I'll read the last 10.
I failed to introduce the city clerk, Mark Chomsky, earlier. I'm doing so now, and we look forward to hearing the comments.
Bradley Bowman, Pasadena resident. I believe the city council needs to create an independent auditor for the police. With any police that have killed any civilian, those investigations need to be reopened by an independent counselor with zero influence from the cop union or city council. Justice needs to be served. To make sure situations like this don't happen in the future, there needs to be more accountability on our police department. I am very disappointed in our police. Also, to find out that majority of the city council members actually receive donations from the police union themselves. That's pretty disturbing to hear. Please take action and do the right thing, City Council. Make the world better for the future, for your mother, father, siblings, future kids, future grandkids, friends, family. Be the change. Ana Marie Molina, Pasadena resident. I support the Kennedy Tornick proposal. I ask you all consider the pain the community is dealing with and show leadership by working together. Only a proposal that is done in cooperation will be successful. Sonja Burnett, Pasadena resident. The Tornick Kennedy proposal has evaluated the discussion of the clear need for civilian oversight of the PPD, but it does not provide the transparency and accountability required to engender public trust. During my 31-year legal career, I conduct hundreds of investigations and issued hundreds of subpoenas. The scope of review of the IPA under the Tornick Kennedy proposal is not going to result in effective civilian oversight because the IPA is only authorized to review the PPD's own work. The IPA must be authorized to conduct an independent investigation with subpoena power to compel evidence the PPD does not turn over. The evidence that the PPD did not collect, the evidence a whistleblower wishes to provide, etc. Moreover, the IPA cannot report to the city manager who also supervises the police chief. That creates a conflict of interest. In order to ensure that we have the best model possible at this time, please review the model in which the IPA reports to the city prosecutor. This has been analyzed in any meaningful way. Respectfully, the city should obtain an independent legal analysis on how this model would work to avoid the city attorney's conflict of interest in providing that analysis. Areta Corwell, Pasadena resident. I applaud the efforts of Mayor Tornick and Councilman Kennedy to be responsive to the public demand for improved oversight and accountability. However, this proposal does not go far enough. I urge the council to continue efforts to craft policy and actions to provide truly independent oversight, which is not bound to the existing bureaucratic structure. Lydia Breen, Pasadena resident. We are in the midst of a pandemic. People are anxious and afraid. Parents are worried about their children's education, afraid they could lose their jobs, even their homes. Tensions are high. So what does the council do? First, it increases money for the police. Then it ignores public demands for an independent auditor with subpoena power over the PPD. Is this how you ease the tension in our community? Who will oversee the military-grade federal weapons donated to the PPD? Who will oversee what happens to the surveillance gathered helicopters, drones, and other electronic equipment and law-abiding citizens? Just whose interests are you serving? Pasadena has the second highest level of income inequality among California's largest cities. 67% of Pasadenas are renters. Many of us are vulnerable. The tension in our community aren't the responsibility of the police. They are your responsibility. Take the target off the PPD's back and put the responsibility where it belongs, on you. De-escalate future problems now by enforcing closer scrutiny of the police. Show some courage. Have more confidence in and concern for the public. Appoint an independent auditor with subpoena power to oversee the PPD. We are paying attention. Robert Bourne, Pasadena resident. All police officers need to be held accountable. Pasadena residents deserve to know, 1, when an officer uses force unlawfully, especially when it causes injury or death to the victim. 2, when an officer is using racial profiling to harass residents. 3, when the department is using surveillance technologies such as facial recognition Today, residents are not told of these things. Creating strong civilian oversight of the police department is a tangible step the city can take to reimagine police duties and public safety in our community. Jasmine Boyle, Altadena resident. My name is Jasmine Boyle. I recently moved to Altadena, but was a Pasadena resident for more than 10 years, primarily in District 2. My husband, Max Boyle, and I are youth pastors in Pasadena. Having worked with junior high and high school students and their families in the Pasadena area for more than 10 years, I believe that a responsible and caring community allows its members to have influence and voice into every area governance. An effective police oversight body includes these voices and the power necessary to enact actual consequences when those meant to protect us actually violate our community. The youth of our communities deserve to know that our government officials are enough to invest in proven models of oversight that build trust and don't protect the power of the already powerful, but give the power to the community. I am asking you, our elected officials, to create a police oversight body comprised of an independent auditor and selected community members for the commission with subpoena power. There is no ambiguity in our ask to align with a proposal with the Community Bill of Rights authored by respected and trusted groups in the Pasadena community. Mariana, Pasadena resident. Hello, my name is Mariana. I'm a resident of District 4. Any member of this community can be the next George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. However, with this proposal, maybe we can prevent this from happening. I asked the Public Safety Committee, the mayor, Mr. Hampton, Mr. Madison, and Mr. Kennedy to please work together on adopting our community proposal. The Pasadena Community Bill of Rights endorsed by POP, CCOP, IMA, and CCC. I am asking you, our elected officials, to create a police oversight body comprised of an independent auditor and selected community member for the commission with subpoena power. Julie McCoon, Pasadena resident. I am dismayed by the council's paternalistic decision to deny the public's call for an independent auditor with subpoena powers to oversee the police. It follows the council's decision to increase rather than decrease the police budget when funds should instead be allocated to educate, healthcare, shelter, and food for people in need. The status quo is unacceptable in this time of crisis. A tsunami of evictions may soon hit LA County. In Pasadena, 67% of our residents are renters. What is your solution when local families get thrown out on the street during a pandemic? Will you take the time-honored solution of politicians with perpetual interest, more police, more guns? Is that why you voted to increase the police budget? Councilmember Kennedy justifies increasing the budget by saying the police took 160 guns off the street this year. What he fails to say, and what the review board will not say without the independent auditor, is how many military-grade weapons were donated to the PPD under the federal government's 1033 program. People are anxious and afraid. I fear your so-called solutions will come back at you and sadly the rest of us.
Rachel Raywald Miriam, Altadena resident. I live in Altadena, but my children attend Pasadena-fied schools, and goodness knows I pay a lot of sales tax to your city. Therefore, I think you should listen to my comments. You need to adopt citizen oversight of your police department as requested by our local chapter of the NAACP. Their plan is real oversight. Their plan is real oversight, not pretend, moneyed, privileged oversight. Be good boys and girls and vote for it. That is a reference to a critical moment in the fight for women's suffrage. If you didn't know, you can look it up. You have an opportunity to make history and turn the tide on human suffering, human rights, and begin a new era in American rights. Can you imagine that just 100 years ago, women protesters were force-fed, shamed, and died for the right to vote? Black people deserve equal rights under the law, including under law enforcement. This is the time. It's already overdue. Sincerely, a white mother ally, done seeing people of color die at the hands of the police. Gwyneth Jurgens, Pasadena resident. I am a white woman and have been a resident of Pasadena all my life. There have been countless times my friends of color have been stopped, pulled over, and threatened by police for doing no wrong. I have accompanied these friends in situations where they were not speeding, drinking, or causing public disturbance of any kind, simply met with racism. I'm asking you, our elected officials, to create a police oversight committee comprised of independent auditors and selected community members for the commission with subpoena power. We are demanding alignment with the Community Bill of Rights. The power of the police must be checked and redistributed. Catherine O'Neill Peterson, Pasadena resident. I asked the Public Safety Committee, the mayor, Mr. Hampton, Mr. Kennedy, and Mr. Madison and Mr. Kennedy to please work together on adopting our community proposal, the Pasadena Community Bill of Rights, endorsed by POP, CCOP, IMA, and CCC. I'm asking you, our elected officials, to create a police oversight body comprised of an independent auditor and selected community members for the commission with subpoena powers. The actions you have taken thus far are not enough. I implore you to reconsider your actions. From Ashley, Pasadena resident. My name is Ashley and I'm a resident District 1. Today I'm writing to the Public Safety Commission along with the rest of the council members to create a police oversight body with subpoena power that is comprised of an independent auditor and commission members elected by the Pasadena community. I believe we are a progressive city, and now it is time that we move forward with police oversight body. We are not requesting an attorney general to look over the entire city or a body appointed by the council. Instead, we are asking for a body of community members and an independent auditor with the authority to be transparent with the community and hold the police accountable. Please listen to the community and align your proposal with the Community Bill of Rights. From Jeffrey Fenstermaker, Pasadena. My name is Joe, and I am a Pasadena resident in District 3. I was disappointed and confused by the results of the vote on Agenda Item 7 at the August 3rd meeting. I am again asking you, our elected officials, to create a police oversight body comprised of an independent auditor and selected community members for the commission with subpoena power. There is no ambiguity in our ask to align a proposal with the Community Bill of Rights. This is the bare minimum needed to help build trust in these institutions. From Kenichi Yoshida, Pasadena. Hello, my name is Kenichi Yoshida, and I'm a resident of Pasadena in the 91107 zip code. As an immigrant, husband, father, higher ed administrator, faith leader of this community, I asked the City Council to please strengthen the proposed model for police oversight. I asked the council to limit conflicts of interest and provide subpoena power by reestablishing the office of the city prosecutor and to house an independent police auditor within it. I asked the council to grant more community access into the Oversight Commission. Please give the oversight body an opportunity to effect meaningful improvements in the way residents of Pasadena are policed. Your attention to this matter is highly appreciated. Reverend Faith Ramasco, Pasadena. My name is Reverend Faith Ramasco, and I am a pastor at PASNAS. We are located in District 4 and have been established in Pasadena for over 100 years. I serve on the board of the Clergy Community Coalition and am part of the Racial Justice Coalition of Greater Pasadena. I ask that the Public Safety Committee work to adopt the community proposal as outlined in the Community Bill of Rights, endorsed by the Clergy Community Coalition and the Interdenominational Ministry Alliance. I am asking that meaningful change be made and that the voice of the community be prioritized to create a police oversight body. This body must be comprised of select community members. This body must include an independent auditor. There must be subpoena power. From Breath Justice, Pasadena resident. Council members, your constituents are committed to improving the way our communities are policed. This will not dwindle over time. Will you serve us or stifle us? If the current proposal is the only oversight model to be considered at this time, please start by strengthening it in 5 ways. Eliminate city manager, police chief, commission appointees. Ultimately, these two have final say in the implementation of commission recommendations. This provides them more than adequate representation. Replace these appointees with 2 additional community appointees. 2, stipulate that current, former, or family of police officers shall not serve on the Police Oversight Commission or in the Independent Police Auditor's Office. Such a conflict of interest would counteract the desired goal of transparency. 3, ensure that relevant subject matter training includes both policing and civil rights. 4, provide substantial funding for the Oversight Commission and IPA to effectively fulfill duties. Reestablish the office of the city 5, reestablish the officer of the city prosecutor and house the IPA within it. Diminish the long-standing conflict of interest stemming from Pasadena's combined city attorney/city prosecutor's office and give the oversight body subpoena power. Please give the proposed oversight model a chance to unite our communities and enhance safety by equipping it with power and community input.
Mark, can you repeat the name of that?
This person has been submitting comments under the name Breath Justice, BREATHE Justice.
Do you have a telephone number for them?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Breathe Justice would probably be more accurate. Thank you, Mr. Manager. This is submitted by a concerned Pasadena parent. Respectfully, Mr. Madison, contrary to your statements, organizers of the August 1st Peaceful Police Oversight Parade did not request police resources, and yours was the only home with a police officer and vehicle stationed out front. The point is that Blacks are often unable to rely upon police officers to protect and serve them. In recent days, we've seen terrified Black children handcuffed and forced face down on the ground when police officers erroneously stopped their vehicle. Black teenagers were held by police at gunpoint despite police being called to defend the teens from a violent knife-wielding man. As Black parents, we must teach our children techniques to de-escalate situations with police officers before we even consider driving lessons. We have a distinct opportunity to chart a different course with meaningful police oversight in Pasadena. Council members, please commission the most effective police oversight body possible. Limit conflicts of interest by separating the office of the city prosecutor from the city attorney. Grant subpoena power by placing the IPA under the city prosecutor's purview. Give the community a significant voice in the way it is policed. Together, we can make Pasadena safer while holding citizens and police officers accountable for their actions. From Tina Rowe, Pasadena. I'd like to join the many in our city of Pasadena community in demanding a civilian police oversight committee be created. I and those engaged in our Black and Brown community and all persons of all colors are aligned with this demand. We are organized and seeking that our voices are elevated to the city council so they vote in favor of the Kennedy Tornick proposal. George Corzin, Pasadena resident. As a starting point, the current proposal for Pasadena Police needs only one change to be acceptable. Only one change to be acceptable. Each council district should have a commission member chosen by some random method or lottery rather than by each council member as proposed. Mr. Madison constantly wants to be measured because he clearly has that luxury. Mr. Hampton in his haste said that everything the council does is legal, meaning that some lawsuit may follow. Likewise, everything the council does is political, and so what? Obfuscation and political mumbo jumbo notwithstanding, there is no reason to delay this action any further and simply get it done. If the commission does its job properly, it will be revisited often. Gina Dance, Pasadena. My name is Gina and I live in District 3. I have had difficulty understanding this committee's perspective in creating a civilian oversight body with subpoena powers. Meeting after meeting, we as residents show up and plead our needs. My community deserves a police oversight body comprised of an independent auditor and selected community members for the commission with subpoena power. We need accountability and transparency, which has failed in the past and will fail with the current proposal. My community has suffered due to the hands of PPD, and this committee has done nothing. I know changing the charter was voted no by 6 council members at the last council meeting. My council member and the majority of the Public Safety Committee members, except Councilmember Hampton, were part of that 6-person vote. I am disappointed that more control is not being given to the actual residents of Pasadena. The status quo has not worked and the fight is not over. I am asking our elected officials to create a police oversight body comprising of an independent auditor and community members for the commission with subpoena power. This is what the community needs and deserves. That completes the public comment we received for this item.
Mr. Vice Mayor Hampton.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mark. And was it Valerie that also read?
That's correct.
Oh, perfect. Thank you guys both for reading these public comments. I have to say that I'm very grateful for your office for going through all of these public comments, given the fact that, COVID is really kind of just changed the way we conduct business. With that being said, I do think the proposal that was originally proposed, I just have to say that I personally don't have an issue with it, or I don't personally have an issue with the way it's formatted, the naming on it, but as a representative of a district that has asked for legitimate oversight, I think that this proposal falls short of actually providing oversight. And it's not to criticize the authors of this proposal, but more so just to shed light to the way our process typically works. And I believe that our process, I don't know exactly what it is, but I believe that our process typically works in the way of where we have been given what the best practices are in other cities and other locations, and then we have discussions about it. And maybe because of haste, or maybe because of the timing of all of this and wanting to get something to the community, that process, in my opinion, and I believe that maybe Councilman Madison feels the same way, that process was not abided by. But that's neither here nor there. We're at this place where we're at today, and we have something to go off of, which is the framework of most oversight bodies, I would say. So do you mind if we pick this apart, piece by piece? I think the mayor kind of alluded to some of the pieces. And so I would prefer to start with the auditor and where that auditor would be housed. And I would like to kick off that conversation. I do believe that having the auditor, Hayden, I don't know where it is. You can find it. I believe that having the auditor in the position outside of the city manager's office, and no offense to the city manager, would help with creating some sort of level of trust amongst community members who are looking for independence. Because most community members understand that the same person who hires the police chief, the same person who would hire this auditor, and so there could be a perceived conflict of interest when it comes to who's doing the best job, and and what information is being shared with those on the commission. So I do think that having it in the city attorney's office, or splitting up the city attorney, city prosecutor's office is a good place to start. I've mentioned that before, even before we even had these discussions. So I would like to really have an in-depth conversation about that. I do think that the opinion of separating those positions should not be a position written up by our city attorney, because I don't think, it just doesn't seem like she would be advocating to split the position. So I'm not saying that I want someone to advocate. I just want to have the most complete picture of it. And then also, what would it look like if this auditor was housed the city attorney's office, and would that be part of her scope of work? Would that be also something that we could, as a city council, could hold her accountable for at the end of the day? Because we actually have that ability to actually hold all of our direct reports responsible.
So let's take the first, Vice Mayor, let's take the first question and kick it around with your colleagues or with our colleagues, and bring Javon Rod into the conversation as the first of a series of questions that you may have. So let's start with that one. And Chief Deputy City Attorney, would you like to share with the committee, again, the ins and outs of placing the independent auditor position in the city attorney's office, whether it be a true bifurcation, or the city attorney's office? Is it possible that you could share with us how that may work, or if it can work?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. I can share a little bit. I guess the question for the chair is, we provided some of this in writing to the council a couple of weeks ago, and I don't want to repeat it. If you, or would you like me to give an abbreviated version, or how much would you like?
I would suggest that abbreviated version, out of respect for the Vice Mayor's question.
Did you find it?
And the fact that I want to be abundantly fair to my colleagues. And
Can you do your math, and I can help you find it after I'm done?
you want to mute, Vice Mayor? So I would like you to give the abbreviated version. You are correct. We have received some information from your office, but the question is there new information in addition to what you shared with us in writing that you can share with us today?
I'd say we don't have any new information, and I think the short answer to the Vice Mayor's question is this can probably be done, but there may be some practical and technical issues, not only just with setting up an ethical wall, but how information can be shared in order to address things. And some of it also depends on what level of involvement the council wanted the position to have, in terms of would it just be review monitoring, doing investigations, having subpoena power. And so the short version would be, we can probably find a way to make it work, but there may be some practical hurdles to overcome.
So
You mind if I ask?
just to be clear, are you telling the members of the committee that we can in fact have subpoena power? That was one of the Vice Mayor's primary concerns. And are you telling the committee that the potential IPA position could in fact report to either the city attorney or a bifurcated city prosecutor or city attorney? We do need those answers in a fuller disposition or exposition.
Sure, and I think, Mr. Chair, the subpoena power is something that probably can be given to the auditor position, but the challenge for what types of matters could be subpoenaed, because of the way the charter presently reads, the auditor wouldn't be able to use subpoena power to conduct personnel investigations. It would only be for review and monitoring matters, not for actually conducting personnel investigations.
Okay, I'd ask my colleague, Mr. Vice Mayor, you have the floor.
So that is that's something that I think we should delve into a little further. I did have a question that you had mentioned about an ethical wall. Could you explain a little bit about what that ethical wall is?
Sure. So basically, within the department, there's an ethical wall between the civil lawyers and the prosecution office to avoid potential conflict of interest issues. But we'd have to explore this a little further, depending on how much the council, if the council wanted to further explore the concept of an auditor, either in the city attorney's office or in the prosecutor's office, to really ensure that the auditor could do what the council was charging the position with doing, but also such that the auditor wasn't dealing in information that they shouldn't be dealing in, or sharing information in places that they shouldn't share it. And so in terms of the ethical wall, that's sort of setting up an additional ethical wall for purposes of insulating the auditor beyond what we have existing between the civil lawyers and the prosecution lawyers.
So the way it works right now, our city attorney acts as our city attorney and our city prosecutor, correct?
Yes.
And so are you saying that that ethical wall is not there now?
No, so there's different legal concepts with running a civil office and a prosecution office, and in terms of individual prosecutions and individualized filing decisions, and that's a separate analysis from what we'd have to embark on with respect to the police auditor.
So my question is, what I'm trying to figure out, is that not happening now? Because that should be happening, correct?
As between the civil lawyers and the prosecution lawyers, that's happening now.
Right. Okay. So that's fine. So what I would be saying is, so since that is happening now and there is an ethical wall there, are you saying that it would be harder, or not hard, let me not say harder, let me say, would it be challenging to split the positions? Because technically there's an ethical wall there until we hired a city prosecutor who answers to the city council, which is already in our charter. That could happen.
So I guess
I
guess I'm not prepared to address the attorney and prosecutor question, Vice Mayor Hampton. But what I can say as to the auditor, that's erecting sort of this third wall, if you will. And how does that fit in with the two offices? And that's the challenge in terms of with what's on the agenda here, that we would be faced with if the council were to move forward here. We'd have to make sure we properly erected an ethical wall for the auditor and not just for civil and prosecution functions.
Right, but there should already be an ethical wall there. That's what I'm trying to get to. And you're saying that there is an ethical wall there, and it's sounding as if this is more complex than, or it's being made as more complex than it really is, because there should be an ethical wall there, and our city attorney should not be influencing or talking to our city prosecutor the way it is now. But we just do not have that as, that's not how it's working right now. We have a city prosecutor who answers to our city attorney.
So, and I'm prepared to talk about the auditor function, Vice Mayor Hampton.
Okay. So no, I'm talking about the office. And so the fact is, if the offices are separated, we'd be having this conversation with our city prosecutor and putting this under our city prosecutor's purview until, I guess, community members have the opportunity to go to a ballot, or the council decides, as I believe in in the plan that has been presented to us, has the potential of, a charter amendment 2 years from now.
Okay, so I guess, Mr. Vice Mayor, I think I understand your question. So the question is, right now, the city attorney's office, city prosecutor's office are in the same department. If the city prosecutor's office were its own department with a separate city prosecutor, would the ethical wall issue that we've flagged with respect to the police auditor, would that still exist? And the answer is yes.
No, I get that. I mean, there's an ethical wall regardless of the fact, but it sounds like, and I'm sorry, Javon, that we're going back and forth, but it almost is, now we all know about this ethical wall. It's almost as if these departments should have not been consolidated 20 years ago. And I don't know the purpose or why they were consolidated. I haven't been able to figure out that information. That wasn't, public information or public knowledge. I don't think there was even a vote of the council to consolidate these. At least I didn't see any record of that. And so that ethical wall should have never, ever come down, and it should be there. So technically the conversation I mean, they're all hypothetical conversations, right? I mean, so it's what we can do for our residents is by answering their questions and by answering their emails, their concerns, and the concern with them having this auditor answering to the same person who hires the police chief is putting this auditor in a separate department that actually answers to the city council, and we actually answer to the people. So that's where I'm going at with this. It can be done. I'm sure that with anything, even with hiring an auditor, there will be a level of challenge. So it's, we're having these conversations so that we can talk about what challenges we'll be facing here in the future. So I can support a plan that actually has a separation of who's hiring the auditor and who the auditor answers to. And by California statute, this auditor, whether it be in the city attorney's office or the city prosecutor's office, this auditor would have the authority to have subpoena power. So given by, of course, given by their boss, which would be the city attorney or the city prosecutor. So I just wanted to, bring that as part of the discussion. That very strong about that. I mean, I just want to make sure that if we have oversight, there's someone in a whole nother department that is, not answering directly to our city manager, but answering to the council or answering to the prosecutor or answering, but there should be less of a level away from answering to Councilmember Collins, our council as a whole. And I think that's that's how I think. That's what I've heard from day one from all of the public comments was that they wanted independence. And also they want the ability to have subpoena power. And so having a separation between the city, going back to the way we were originally 20 plus years ago, having a city attorney having a city attorney and a city prosecutor as a direct report to the city council would be a step in the right direction as far as giving the community a level of accountability and someone who will be transparent.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. On this issue, you still have the floor, but I'd like to ask my other colleagues if they have questions specifically on the issue you have raised related to subpoena power that the independent auditor would enjoy if the council so moved in that direction.
I don't know if they would enjoy it, but but they would definitely have the ability to have that if, for instance, information is being withheld that is legal to receive. And I put quotations around legal.
You froze a minute there. I would like to recognize Councilmember Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the Vice Mayor's comments, and I think, respectfully, I think this is the kind of discussion we should be having. In other words, the Vice Mayor is raising certain potential components of an oversight scheme, if you will, and I mean that in the sense of regulatory or legislation, of a policy that is a serious topic and bears the need for discussion. And so, what I'd like us to do is come up with a process so that we are taking note of these things and then following up and studying them, not comparing them to some model that's been developed by one or more council members, but having a discussion about the matter at hand. And I think the question of the prosecutor, I want to just chime in on that because I was on this council when the decision was made to essentially terminate that position as a separate position. Under the charter, there are actually 4 direct reports to the city council: city manager, the city clerk, the city attorney, and the city prosecutor. And when I joined the council, we had a separate city prosecutor whose office was separate from the city attorney. And without going into all of the reasoning or the logic of it, I will just tell you, I was in the minority that I felt we should maintain our own separate city prosecutor's office, including for some of the reasons that you're identifying. You know, there is an inherent potential conflict when the civil assistants and deputies are defending police matters, and the prosecutors may be required to investigate those. And, you know, I wasn't successful in persuading my colleagues. This part will sound familiar to you all. I wasn't successful in persuading my colleagues, and the decision was made that it was more expedient and less risky to simply fold that, really eliminate that position, if you will, or not fill it, and move the prosecutors under the aegis of the city attorney. So I think that's a very serious topic that we should discuss. And it's not, you know, completely a police oversight issue. I think there are other issues that go with that, but I think it's a serious topic, and I too would like to discuss that. The question of subpoena power is complicated because, and I think Mr. Rudd answered this question, that the issue really isn't the ability of an inspector or an independent auditor to be able to obtain access to the information or the documents. I really don't think that's an issue. The police chief works for the city manager, and the independent auditor, at least under the proposals that have been discussed so far, I think would also report, you know, to the city manager or possibly to the council. But the point is that if the city manager or his employees weren't getting, or if this council weren't getting the information that we require to make sound judgments, well, there's a problem, and that would be a problem that the city manager could deal with, or we could deal with in the normal course. Rather, the problem is that there are certain legal impediments to anyone getting certain information, you know, as it relates to disciplinary decisions or personnel matters in the police department, and for sound public policy reasons, you know, under the Police Officers' Bill of Rights and the nature of the work that police officers do and all the rest. Now, I get that we are questioning all of these long-held assumptions and policies and laws right now, but I think that too is a very serious topic that should be put on the table and discussed. That, you know, are there some advantages to having an independent auditor? Would the city prosecutor's office be the appropriate agency? Who would that person report to? You know, where does that fit into this overall policy that we would hope to come up with to address, you know, the concerns about oversight of the police department? So, you know, my comments are more about process at this point, because these are serious topics, and frankly, I think the full city council needs to discuss them, because we're not going to save any time, energy, or resources at the committee level. This is the kind of thing that the entire council is going to have an opinion on and have to participate, you know. And so I don't know if a workshop would be appropriate for the city council, for example. You know, we haven't done one of those in a long time. You know, we used to do retreats fairly regularly under the prior mayor, where we'd all ensconce ourselves at the convention center and spend a whole day addressing certain issues of importance. This warrants that kind of effort, not sort of, you know, quick question and answer off the fly. You know, on the fly with the city attorneys doing the best they can in a committee meeting to answer. I mean, we should have documentation on this. And I think the chief pointed out that, I can't recall if the chief is there, he could, you know, correct me on this, but you know, that there are only something like 200 police departments in the country that have a form of oversight out of how many, Chief?
Yeah, there's 17,000 police departments, 12,000 municipal police departments, and less than 200, probably about 110 or 15 have oversight committees.
So, you know, it's extremely unusual, and I'm not commenting on the wisdom or, you know, whether we should or we shouldn't. And I'm sure if we came back a year from now, that number will have changed, right? Because of the issues that the community is concerned about. But the point is, there's a limited database out there of, as the Vice Mayor says, best practices. And we should be availing ourselves of those. And we should, you know, the staff should be tasked with coming back and presenting an array of those today, not the one from 4 years ago, but, you know, right now. Maybe the one from 4 years ago can be used to as a starting point, but it should be updated. And then, and I would also, if I could, Mr. Chair, ask the clerk, and I have a lot of gratitude for the clerk's office. They've done yeoman's work on this. And they were kind enough after the last meeting to organize the letters and the community input. I would ask them to do that with the communications we received today. So, you know, if possible, to work that into the organization that they already did, so we have a sense of what the different viewpoints are in the community. And again, some people have multiple viewpoints, and I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if some of the communications we got today are from folks that had already communicated with us in prior meetings, which is fine. I would just like to have an understanding of all that if possible.
We'll do our best to tally as this meeting goes on.
So I would say that the council member has asked a series of questions. They are, I think, good questions. I think they do need to go to the full council. I think that the benefit of having them at the Public Safety Committee meeting is that we can help tee those up, and you specifically can tee up your own, but for a fuller discussion at the city council level. I think the community is really saying that they want true oversight. They want, at least a segment of the community for sure, those who are responding, want true oversight, and they want the oversight to have some teeth to that oversight. And the only thing that I would want, having worked on this issue for a number of years, is that we bring this matter to a head in the month of August. You also had recommended possibly a workshop. Well, historically, if I have this correct, workshops are not in the purview of the public domain, even though legally, because all of the council members oftentimes historically had attended those workshops, they would be open to the public. And the city attorney could correct me if that is not accurate. So the question I'm asking specifically to the city attorney, if we had a workshop, is not that workshop open to the public? If all of the council members are present, it's duly noticed.
Mr. Chair, yeah, if 5 or more are going to be there, I believe it would be something that would be covered under the Brown Act, like a study session, like a retreat.
Okay, so what I would suggest in my role as chair is that whatever the questions that the members of the committee have, that we put those on the record with staff doing their due diligence to answer those questions and get back to this committee, or certainly be ready to answer them at the council level. And you would have, I think, sufficient time between Wednesday today. If not sufficient time, you would have time between Wednesday today and Monday when the council meeting takes place. Mr. Madison?
Yeah, I just respectfully disagree with that feels rushed to me. And, you know, I won't debate the matter or the reasons why we're rushing. It's already August 12th today. The idea that this has to get done in the next 2 weeks, you know, you can draw inferences about why, but I don't think we'll have this fully studied in the way that the vice mayor is laying out, in the way that I'm laying out. And again, I hear the community loud and clear. But we need to be thoughtful and get this right, not do it fast because there's an election in November.
I don't think, from my perspective, Mr. Madison, the election in November is the issue. From my perspective, the issue is that African Americans in this country have been the recipients of behavior by some law enforcement agencies across the United States that you would not necessarily be subject to as a white male. And so when we saw the death of George Floyd, the heinous murder of George Floyd, it precipitated not just protests in the United States, but protests around the world begging for some additional oversight of law enforcement agencies or police agencies in this country. This is not new to the Public Safety Committee, not new to the council in terms of trying to wrestle with very difficult issues that do not necessarily have easy answers, but it's not related to politics. We didn't create what happened in Minneapolis, but we are in fact resurfacing issues because of what happened in Minneapolis. And I think the majority of the council is willing to put its best hats on and see if we can in fact fashion a way forward and provide that level of community or civilian oversight that has been requested. I respectfully entertain what you're saying. I just don't agree with the constant refrain of the politics part of it. We are in fact elected by the people. So in some respects, that is politics. Mr. Vice Chair.
You know, if I could, Mr. Chair, I won't respond to all of your comments, but you know, I've been on this council a long time. I'm not aware of another policy initiative that was developed the way this one was and bears the name so prominently of two council members. This city council has never operated like that. Now, you say it's a coincidence that there's a mayoral election coming up. I'll leave it to others to judge that. But can we agree that we won't assign any one of our own names to what we do in this important topic, and that we're going to, from this point forward, we'll talk about this as civilian oversight?
I think it's fair to raise that issue. I think it's also more than fair to share with you and others in the community why we're having the discussion. We didn't, in this body, precipitate the protests. We didn't in this body cause the death of anyone, but we are responding in a way that's intelligent. Might there be a better way to get to the issue? Sure, but we're dealing with it. We're grappling with it. We're having public discussions about the issue.
Yeah, and I'm not aware of any member that's not seriously joining in that effort.
Oh no, in no way am I suggesting that the members are not engaging. I respect all of you. You are engaging, and the whole council is engaging on this matter. What I was saying, Mr. Madison, is certainly there are many ways forward, and you can offer a way forward. I can offer a way forward. We all can. But when the final analysis comes, it takes 5 votes of the council to approve any definitive rulemaking or law ordinance that comes from the council. There are other ways to make law, but I'm talking about at the council level. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I have to say that, you know, I've already mentioned the way the process has gone down. And I agree with Councilmember Madison as it comes to this is we're very close to an election. And I don't think, you know, like I said in the last meeting on Monday or 2 Mondays ago, that, you know, that proposal having my name on it was not, I didn't think it was appropriate. And I mentioned that multiple times in that meeting because that was the task that was put upon me by the blessing of the Public Safety Committee. I do respect the work that you've done, and I don't think anyone's going to take away any of that, and people will still be able to point to oversight coming from this body and that Councilmember Kennedy, Mayor Terry Tornick, and and had really spearheaded this. But I think that putting a name on it in the middle of a mayoral election does kind of come off as campaigning on the backs of African Americans who have been slain by the police. And so I don't think that is necessarily fair. I think that having a discussion and your framework is fantastic. And like I said, I don't have issues with the framework. I think that, just with any oversight that we have in the United States that I have seen, has a auditor, an investigator, not an auditor, but an inspector general or auditor position. So that, and also has a commission. Most places have a commission that go along with it. So I have I respect and applaud the effort. I really do. But, my concern and the reason why I was very sharp and to the point at our last meeting was that I felt like, I'm part of this body as well, and I felt like I was left out of the process as if, my ideas, my collective ideas from those that live in my district really didn't matter. And, I was presented something that I was supposed to go back and tell my residents, this is oversight. And in the heart of hearts, and knowing where we are, and knowing that I've been sitting on this body for now 4.5 years, knowing how frustrated we've been at times because we haven't been able to get information. And the proposal, basically, in my impression and all the questions that I've been asked to the city attorney, it's almost back to where we were in the first place. And I was thinking like, well, do we get rid of the public safety committee now? Is there no longer a need for this body? I mean, that's also a question to be asked. Is there still a need for the public safety committee after something like this goes in the Vice Mayor,
I'm recognizing you because you had shared that.
Oh yeah, I still had other points.
If you would, you had shared at the beginning of the meeting that you had a number of questions, and out of fairness, I wanted to have staff and the colleagues look at those questions and give responses. If you have additional questions, I think we need to do that. But parenthetically,
I will not.
If I may, Mr. Vice Mayor, parenthetically, we're not seeking to do anything on the backs of African Americans. The fact of the matter is that African Americans feel here in Pasadena and across the country that they have been the butt of unwarranted police action. And so to bring transparency to that whole discussion, we are having it at the Public Safety Committee level. And then beyond that, going to the City Council. As it relates to any proposal, any member of the City Council has an opportunity to bring an idea forward. And this is not an old idea. You shared very strongly ideas that you had about putting the measure on the ballot, and the council took an action. And there will hopefully be an action taken upon how Councilmember Madison says, without naming, the question of civilian or community oversight of the police department removed from naming it by a council member or the mayor. So please ask your questions.
So with that being said, because you keep on alluding to the vote at the council, it almost feels like this process is being usurped for me, and as well as Councilmember Madison. I can't speak for Councilmember Madison because he is. So are you saying that the questions that I have really doesn't matter? You can keep on asking all the questions you want to ask, Tyrone, but the proposal that we're going to vote on is the proposal that we already proposed.
No, what I'm saying.
Because that's how I just want you to know that's how it's coming across.
Oh, and if you're allowing me to answer your question,
go ahead.
What I'm saying is that at the outset of your being recognized by the chair, you had a series of questions that you wanted to ask. I just asked that we deal with them in a methodical fashion so the colleagues could ask questions and also staff could respond to your questions. I'm not reaching a conclusion. I just want to get everything on the record that the council can deal with it and we can have that discussion based on the minutes that are going to be provided from this meeting.
And let me be clear to all of my colleagues that my questions are not questions, they're suggestions. So I hope that these suggestions come, and I was asking questions, but the suggestion to separate this position is I am adamant about that, having this position not answer to the city manager. And so without that, I can't support a proposal or any oversight at all, or at least I couldn't call it oversight. I would just call it a new body. And I would say that the city manager is hiring a new person. And I wouldn't call it oversight. That's not what it would be. And I would be lying to myself by calling it. And so I cannot personally go. So more suggestions come right now. As far as the commission piece of it goes, I'm in agreement with community members that have stated that they would like that process to be more of a public process and how we pick city council members for when there are open seats.
Let me ask you a question about that, Vice Mayor. The mayor had made some suggestion that it'd be a process similar to one that the Northwest Commission enjoys. What is your thought about that type of framework if the commission goes forward in terms of a selection process?
I was going to say that I put that down as my notes. I think that the idea of having representation in areas that are, known to have not so positive experiences with law enforcement in general would be, I think, is definitely a step in the right direction and fair to that community that has been asking for this for so many years. So having a model similar to the Northwest Commission that actually has the ability to to guide policy. I guess they can't really, say you have to write this because that's not what we're voting on, or that's not, we'd have to change the charter for that. But to be able to guide that policy discussion from those amongst our community that have had, not the greatest experiences with law enforcement would be good. So I agree with that statement that 1, 3, and 5 should have two picks. And I was going to mention that. So I'm sure Councilman Madison probably was like, I should get 2 picks. Not go ahead. He's raising his hand.
Vice Mayor, in terms of your questions or suggestions, are you pretty much finished? Then I'll recognize Councilmember Steve Madison.
Yeah, I was pretty much finished. I just want to make sure that the process was extremely transparent. And I do believe that the criteria should, as I mentioned during Monday night, 2 Mondays ago, the criteria should be not before you get picked, because I believe there was like 30 hours of some sort of training that needs to be done. I think that 30 hours should be along during your first year. You should be able to accomplish your training within your first year, and that should be something that should hold you, to not be able to apply in the beginning, right? And also, I believe that our commissioner should receive a stipend just like the planning commission, because I think that would help with keep people coming to the meeting. So those were my series of suggestions as far as it goes to oversight and creating something meaningful until we could have the opportunity for, if the residents decide, that they want to go further, they have the opportunity to go back to the ballot.
as it relates to, I'm trying to understand. Okay, so you would. Okay, we'll move forward. Thank you very much, Vice Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Steve Madison.
Well, obviously I'm troubled by the idea that certain 3 separate council districts would receive twice the representation of the other. I guess one question I would have in the 200 other cities where there's police oversight, do any of them do that? Weight the representation in such a way? And to me, that smacks of simply trying to find a 5th vote and offering additional appointments as a way of doing that. The police department and public safety is a huge part of our general fund budget. And I don't know why we shouldn't represent voters and residents of all races and ethnicities in all parts of the city equally on that commission. So I think that would be very difficult for the proposal, would be my sense, that the others would feel, as I do, that there should be equal representation there. This isn't a geographic commission. This is a commission that should be important to all of us across the board. But that was a serious question for the staff. I'd like in future reports to see, if that model has been used anywhere else. And if so, I'd like to learn more about it. If the Vice Mayor is proposing that the independent auditor report directly to the City Council, could I ask the City Attorney's Office, would that require a charter amendment?
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't saying that it should report directly to the City Council now because we passed that. I was saying it should report to the City Prosecutor or City Attorney's Office and not necessarily the City Manager's Office.
Oh,
so we've already passed the idea of having this auditor. That was on Monday. So that ship is sailed.
So it would report to either the City Attorney or the City Prosecutor.
Right.
Is that, I have some questions about that too, whether under the definition of those positions, whether that role would be appropriate to report to those officers. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Vice Mayor, that in a perfect world, you'd have that person report to the City Council directly?
I agree, and that happened on Monday, but that ship is sailed. So, we have until 2022 to, it is 2022, right? Yeah, 2022 for the residents to decide if they want to go back out for a charter initiative.
Yeah, but I'd really like to see a robust report about the other 200 cities and how they do these things as we move forward in this discussion. So,
any other questions that you have?
I'd like to hear from staff if that's something that staff is able to do for us.
Councilmember Madison, I think your couple questions are in terms of for the agencies that have appointments by the City Council, because some cities, they do it by lottery for residents. The existing process is for the review boards where the bodies are the individuals are selected by the chief of police. That's in the current municipal code. But for the cities that have council members appoint, the question is there any kind of weighting in favor of specific council districts? That was one question.
Yeah, again, I don't want you to answer these on the fly.
Right. I'm trying to frame the question to come back.
Right. And my question, first of all, is has there been a comprehensive review of the 200 different civilian oversights in the country, sort of broken down by how they go about it?
Not that I'm aware of. I think the closest sort of the easy reference would be the 2016 report that is in, I think, today's agenda packet that I think reviews largely California agencies, but it doesn't review agencies around the country.
So can the staff update that report so that we have up-to-date information about best practices throughout the country?
Throughout the country or through just California?
Well, if there are only 200 in the country, that shouldn't be that difficult. You know how many are in California?
somewhere in the range of 15 to 20. And I think the 2016 report that's part of the agenda packet, I think had a fairly comprehensive expression of the then current age of cities with oversight.
Well, I would ask you to at least take a look at that in terms of if it's only 200, that shouldn't be hard to categorize. My guess is this is such a topic of interest and importance right now that probably a fair amount has already been written about this, and we should have the benefit of that. And then within that, yes, I'm just curious if this model of weighting certain districts, and out of how many total would the, Mr. Chair, the proposal would be a total of 13 with 6?
Oh, I'm not exactly sure. I just heard the mayor had mentioned as a possibility something similar to Northwest Commission. It's not my suggestion at all. And I wasn't on the council when they created the Northwest Commission. I'm not sure if you were, you can let us know if you were. I don't know how that really happened where 3 districts had, I think, 2 appointments. But understandably, one view is because they're in Northwest and it's about Northwest Commission.
Right.
But I mean, your observations are legitimate. I just don't have an answer because I wasn't a part of at that time.
Yeah, I'm more interested in this context, whether there's precedent for that. I mean, certainly there are other commissions, you know, the Old Pasadena Parking Commission, the PCOC, where stakeholders are represented because of the nature of the matter. I don't view policing in the city of Pasadena, with all the implications it has for all of us, as being one that should be geographically raised in that way.
Okay.
So, but I'd be interested in knowing, having that included in the staff report. Thank you.
And Councilmember Madison, if I can jump in, this is Steve. So in the 2016 analysis, they looked at 16 charter cities in the state of California. They also looked at 3 non-charter cities in California, as well as 4 non-California cities. I remember when we wrote the RFP, I did the staff work for this assignment. We did ask them to focus specifically on California charter cities. So ultimately, if it was the will of the city council to direct more analysis on this, certainly we could go back and look at whether anything's changed in regard to these studies, cities, and as well as the see what we could find about the remaining cities, assuming that the chief's numbers were about right.
Vice Mayor?
I just want to echo the Vice Mayor that I think we should be looking at best practices. And if we're hearing that only 200 cities in the country out of 30-some thousand police agencies do this, it shouldn't be difficult. And why the city of Pasadena would ever rely on 2016 data when we're here in the second half of 2020 is beyond me.
Did you have another question, Mr.
No, I was going to say,
Vice Mayor?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Councilman Madison, I was going to echo that as well. That was part of my issues with this process is that we're looking at 2015 and 2016 data when those cities, a lot of cities have actually made significant changes since the time this original proposal was written, including the city of LA, including the county of Los Angeles have made significant changes. And so, and now I believe in those bodies, there are community members that feel like there is more transparency and they believe that there's more accountability. And so if we're going to be modeling something, we should be modeling after what is working now and how do we model that to fit into the way that's being structured.
Okay, thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Mayor Territronic.
I've really been in listening mode, and I've really benefited from the comments of our colleagues. I do want to make a couple of observations. One is that I think that, as the chairman has indicated, the reason for the schedule and for the haste is a sense of urgency that's engendered not by the November election, because I'm not sure which way, whether this benefits somebody or hurts somebody, particularly my candidacy. But I think that I'm trying to be responsive, and I think we all are, to the urgency that has been conveyed to us by people after the George Floyd murder. And I think that while it is true that the 2016 report is 3 or 4 years old, it was really, the benefit of it is as a point of departure for a discussion for what might be suitable for Pasadena, not to try to emulate any one model exactly, but to use that information in a coherent way to undertake a review of 200 agencies, to go out, hire a consultant, or have staff start to review current practices, which I think are evolving at a faster rate than they could probably review them. And my estimation would result in important delay and lose the momentum that I think we have in terms of trying to achieve some genuine reform now. I think that the process that's been described as not being typical or extraordinary in any way, it wasn't the chairman or me that labeled this report. I mean, I'm happy to identify going forward forever the draft that we prepared as the July 22nd proposal, not Kennedy Tornick or Tornick Kennedy. That wasn't something that we ever proposed. It was really being done as a convenience, the same way people called it the Hampton proposal, which the vice mayor correctly was trying to disavow, and just saying that it was a proposal that he had been asked to sort of shepherd, but wasn't claiming any pride of authorship. Neither did, from my part at least, it was not about pride of authorship. It was about having a point of departure and a framework for a discussion and taking that task on ourselves rather than turning to staff. Typically what happens is that the council raises question, hands it to staff, it disappears for months and months, comes back to the council starts to massage it, and finally generates some version of what we've been handed. I didn't think that that was an appropriate model in this instance because it's an extraordinary circumstance. So we took it upon ourselves not to go back to staff, which had generated the elaborate and comprehensive study of 2016, but to use that as a point of departure to go out to the public for their suggestions and their desires, and try and craft something that we could move more quickly than typically through the process. It was never intended that the July 22nd proposal would be adopted, as a whole cloth. It was to stimulate exactly the kind of discussion that we're having here today, and I'm grateful for this discussion. And I think there have been a lot of useful and important recommendations, not just questions, that have been raised today. And I think that and I quite agree with my colleagues that this is the work of the council. The only purpose of bringing it back to public safety today was to begin to drill down on some of the specific issues, as we've done successfully, I think, here today, and we will undoubtedly do when we bring it back to the council. So whether it's called a workshop or just a scheduled council item at the next available meeting, which is not Monday, it won't be on Monday's agenda because we haven't had time to absorb or react to what we've talked about today. But it would be my intent to bring it back to the next council meeting following Monday to have a full discussion at the council and get guidance from the council about whether they want to have further study, whether they want some specific questions answered, or whether they're prepared to take some definitive action to demonstrate that that they think it's important to move forward. But I think that the conversations that that we've had today, the sharing on the July 22nd framework and the modifications that various members of the committee have made should all be brought to the council for a larger scale discussion. I'm not in the habit of predicting how people will vote one way or another, because I'm frequently surprised with the way these things, the outcomes that happen on a Monday afternoon now or Monday evening. So it's not about counting noses or fishing for votes, as far as I'm concerned. It's about trying to do the right thing and trying to do it in this instance with a sense of urgency. But I don't discount any of the critiques or legitimate points that my colleagues have made. I regret the fact that the timing on this is being attributed to some political motivation. As far as I'm concerned, nothing could be further from the truth. I believe that even trying to predict what the outcome of this effort will be from the point of view of the way people vote on November 3rd, it's at least beyond my ken. Maybe some of you have more experience and are better able to perceive the outcome. But I'm not apologetic about having a sense of urgency about this and not behaving in a more typical format. I think that we can be well informed, that we will be well informed, and will be guided by the way our colleagues on the council want to take this or not take it. But I do think that we do need to convey, and I quite agree that we need to do this not just fast, but to do it right. I don't think those are mutually exclusive, particularly when seen in the context of what both Councilmember Kennedy and Vice Mayor Hampton have said in viewing this as something that's part of a process, not an end state event that'll be forever after the way that we perform civilian oversight in Pasadena. So I welcome your comments. I have been taking copious notes in terms of what people have had to say, and I hope we can frame up this discussion very soon at a council meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mayor. If I may, I'd like to move the agenda unless someone has a question or comment. Councilmember Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the mayor's comments, although I do feel like, notwithstanding the copious notes, that we're not communicating, because the mayor continues to talk about modifications to the July 22nd proposal. And that's not what the vice mayor and I have been talking about. We've been talking about a completely different approach to civilian oversight for policing. And to my knowledge, the council has not decided that we will do this in the month of August or at the next meeting. I'd welcome the mayor or yourself to make that motion, but there's been no such motion by the council. And, put another way, what I'm hearing is this isn't important enough to do it right. We're going to take a 5-year-old study, slap a new label on it, and then rush it to a vote. And I just disagree with that approach. This is too important to do that. And why on earth would we rely on 5-year-old data as the city of Pasadena in terms of best practices? We talk all the time about in Pasadena, we should be able, and we hold our staff to the requirement that we employ best practices. Why wouldn't we at least have some report about that? And I'm not saying a breakdown of each and every department in the country, but I'm saying at least survey the literature and come back and tell us, well, there's some new models that are being used, not the stuff that's 5 years old. So thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Madison. I don't think it would be helpful to have a colloquy between you and myself. However, I thought that you had made it very clear early on that you believe the breadth and depth of the Public Safety Committee as it's currently constituted is the right way to have the public. We are, in fact, the oversight of the police department. What I'm saying is that a significant portion of the community doesn't believe that the Public Safety Committee, whether it's chaired by you or me or anyone else, has enough robust transparency and civilian participation or community participation. So I don't want us to move in a way that's not wise, but I also don't want us to move in a way that seeks to overanalyze the issues to the point of paralysis and not move forward. We're not going to craft whatever we do, whether any Monday night, it's not perfect. But as you say, let's not have the perfect be the enemy of the good. So it's incumbent upon all of the members of the council, certainly you with your experience, to help lead us to the best solution possible. And I have that expectation from you, and I hope you have that expectation from me and all of our other colleagues.
Well, I think you're characterizing a position that I held for some time. And in fairness, the entire council held that position.
No, not the entire council.
Well, there was never a motion that I'm aware of to establish a citizens police commission.
There was a motion to establish an independent auditor. It was duly made, it was seconded.
Okay.
And there was a vote and it didn't go anywhere.
All right. But there was not a vote, a motion even on a citizens police commission. Because I thought.
I don't recall there being a motion on the commission. I just recall the motion on the independent auditor.
Well, and what you were describing is true, that I have a huge concern about the dilution of the city council's responsibility in this area. And that's one of the things that I think we have to talk about when we formulate whatever our ultimate proposal, and whether that means if we do decide to go with the commission reports to the Public Safety Committee, which then reports to the full council. I think that's one model that we should definitely consider. We've been talking about the independent auditor and whether the auditor can or should report to the city council. I don't necessarily agree that ship has already sailed. And again, I think the idea that we're discussing, in part at least, a proposal that was made 20 days ago means that we're trying to delay unduly, I just think is inaccurate. So.
Well, I think, Councilmember Madison, you are a respected member of the council, a long-serving member of the council. And if you want to see a particular model forward in the light of day, as you have referenced, you have that ability. And you have my commitment as one council member that I would strongly consider any request or movement to get us in the direction of involving the community as best we can under the law in a transparent fashion as oversight for the Pasadena Police Department, whether we call it community involvement or whether we call it civilian. So I think as a respected member of the body, you can offer any suggestion or way forward, and it would be received by the full council or this committee. No, I just don't ascribe to the conversation that there's something baked. There's nothing baked at this point. It is baked when there is the council saying that it's baked by virtue of rulemaking, and that hasn't occurred yet. So we do have the ability to have a full discussion about this issue, and I'm inviting that. I hope you don't feel like I'm not inviting that.
No, I agree. There's nothing baked. And so let's not keep talking about checking the oven to see if it's baked or not. We don't have anything yet. And I may well.
I won't say we don't have anything, Mr. Madison. We have various frameworks that have been floated, whether it's council member and vice mayor, Hampton, pulling something together from the community and sharing that. We have what has been ascribed to the mayor and myself, which we're willing to take that off and just put it as a possibility. We have the questions that you have raised today. We have the questions that the vice mayor has raised today. And I make those as legitimate questions that need to be answered.
For sure. All I meant was the council hasn't gone in any direction yet. And believe you me, I think you know me well enough to know that when we get prepared to do that, I will have a proposal about what direction we should go in. And I'm not somebody that has an election in November. I've got an election in 4 years. Maybe.
I like you.
I don't, in fact, Mr. Chair, I understand there's a runoff election in November. I don't even know what a runoff is, but I've only run 6 times, you know, so
I missed it.
that was a joke.
I know I missed it. I'm sorry.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, council member.
I'm used to runoffs, man.
I think we've had a full discussion about these issues. If we could move the agenda, because I know that I'm going to be accused of laboring. What time is it right now?
5 o'clock, council member.
5 o'clock, and we started at 3, and we have 3 items. And certainly, item number 2 is a very serious item, facial recognition. Item 3, on-street dining and parklets. We definitely have to get to that. And maybe 4 will not be a long presentation because it's the Asset Forfeiture Community Reinvestment Grant Program. So if I may move the agenda with the concurrence of the members of the committee, we'll get to facial recognition, and I would invite the city manager to tee that up.
Before we move the agenda, I just want to make sure that.
Go ahead, Councilman. Vice Mayor.
I just want to make sure that we were clear. So will staff be coming back with the best practices of what's happening now, or I didn't understand the direction that was given to staff after that discussion?
Well, I didn't give staff any direction related to that, but I think there's a reasonable expectation between now and Monday that staff can provide as best they can where we are in the state of California, because that seemingly was the gravitas that we're looking at initially. And I think we looked at a couple agencies. I think there were large agencies outside of California. So I think that's a legitimate request that you're making. But
that's not coming to us. I'm sorry, that's not coming to us this Monday.
Council members, is it okay if I jump in and tell you what my understanding is, and then perhaps you can correct me and steer myself and Mr. Rad? So first of all,
before you answer your answer to your question, Vice Mayor, is it coming to council on Monday? The answer is no. Go ahead, Mr. City Manager.
Right. So we just established that this subject matter is not returning to the city council on Monday. We have already a very full agenda for Monday. There were a series of questions that were put to the city attorney, and I think it would be helpful perhaps if they were followed up in writing unless the city attorney got them. But when this does return to the council, my understanding is that the attorney's office would seek to answer those questions in writing. As to whether staff should undertake an update to the 2016 analysis, if the council so directs it, staff will do that. It would take time. And in 2016, we engaged a consultant. I think it cost us about $50,000 and it took a few months. So I wouldn't want to represent to this body or to the council that the staff, on top of everything else that's going on in the city, including response to COVID-19, that we can turn it around in a couple of weeks. If we're so directed, we will do our level best, but I think it's fair to ask for direction from the council, given that there is a broad range of opinions on this matter. Staff would want the direction to us to be clear. Is that helpful?
Okay, so
I think it would be fair to the council if you reached out to the firm, because they already have this big framework from 2016 that they did, and they potentially have done this for other cities throughout the state. So they may have information that they would be willing to sell to us, or we purchase or whatnot, because we've already had a contract with them, and look at, do they have an updated, do they have anything updated already versus, telling them to go back out and look at all that they've done from 2016 to today? Because that would take a long time, and I understand that. But in the past 4 years, there have been significant changes to oversight model.
Vice Mayor, I think that,
Go ahead. Sorry.
thank you, Vice Mayor. I think that, City Manager, if you even provide a sampling of the number of agencies that were reviewed in the report of April 18, 2016, that would be helpful, and that would not necessarily take the council directing you, and you could probably do that very quickly. And you'd look at the very large, medium-sized, and the smaller agencies, if in fact Pasadena is one of them. And you probably could do that rather quickly without a council vote directing you, and it hopefully would not take a lot of time. I do like the Vice Mayor's suggestion, since the Catherine Change Integration Consulting and Barbara Tard Accountability Associates, I believe, is still in operation or a derivation of that. A quick call may in fact provide answers more than we had anticipated. But that's my view. I think there's a legitimacy in the questions from Councilmember Madison and the Vice Mayor on this topic.
So if I'm hearing the comments correctly, rather than identify what's going on at the 200 plus agencies across the country, the committee feels that it could benefit from just a quick check to see if any of those that were in the 2016 survey have modified their models in any significant way. Is that a fair characterization?
I think that would be helpful, given that we'll be meeting not next Monday, but the following Monday. It's not a exhaustive response, but it is a decent response with the limited time to add to the discussion. It would also allow the council to make a decision if it wanted a deeper dive on this issue. So we've given you some direction that we think that you can get your arms around.
I think we can manage what's been suggested.
Thank you very much. With that,
it won't take the months and months the mayor says it takes the staff. I'm teasing.
With that, I would ask that the city manager tee up the facial recognition issue, invite staff who are going to be a part of that presentation. Mr. Mermel.
Thank you, council member. I would ask that we bring Chief John Perez back into the meeting. I assume he's been monitoring. There's been discussions in our community and others about the use of certain technologies, including facial recognition. That's a very broad topic, and here today to talk a little bit about the technology and any potential applications here in the city of Pasadena and our experience with it is the Chief of Police and Sergeant Tom Blanchard.
Thank you very much, City Manager, and to the Public Safety Committee as well. This is a very, very critical conversation for our community. The digital mugshot system, the facial recognition conversation is essential for us. It is my belief that it's important to use this type of technology in our investigations, not only for violent incidents, but missing persons, child abuse cases, and so many applications. It's important to have this discussion. And we have to understand there's a couple of identifiers. The first is the term identification and surveillance have often been used, facial recognition, and that's an incorrect terms that have been used in the past. I've talked about this constantly with other police chiefs around the state, and even nationally, we've had conversations about the misuse of the terminology with surveillance and identification. The facial recognition systems, we use Vigilant briefly, and we haven't used it in over a year now, or about a year. And that was a system we had used since 2017. That's a private company that uses driver's license from other states to identify individuals that are scanned into the system. We don't use that any longer. It's going to require more conversation for that. The current system we are using is a county system known as Lagris, and this system has been around since 2009. We have used it about 800 times, and we have had about 50 positive, helpful clues for us to start our investigations. And it's important to note that the use for us doesn't have a policy, an active policy with it. What it does have is a guidelines from the county in which we use this system. But it's very, very important as well for people to understand that about 100% investigation, it is less than 1% of any investigation, and it is only a start point for clues as to who a potential suspect might be, as we take photographs and we apply it to the current booking photos inside of the county booking system. So with that, what I do want to do, I could be here to answer some questions, but I'll turn it over to Sergeant Tom Blanchard as he begins his brief presentation.
And Chief,
Sorry.
if you need us to forward the slides, just let us know. We'll move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, members of Public Safety Committee, for the opportunity to present you the presentation for facial recognition. So I've been using facial recognition since about 2017 when I was in detectives. Went to the training with LACRIS, who provided me the training for the facial recognition, and it's proven useful since then during my time in detectives. Basically, the facial recognition, you can read the definition there. It does a face print and uses an algorithm to compare the live captures of the photos that we utilize and cross-references them to the digital mugshot system of LA County booking photos. This technology is a valuable tool to create investigative leads, reduce imminent threat, or identify deceased persons or persons unable to identify themselves. So LACRIS is the LA County Regional Identification System, and like I said, it participates with the digital mugshot system. In the Penal Code 13150, it requires at the time of booking all subjects to provide the fingerprints, photos, and the arrest data to be collected and stored within the Department of Justice system. So this information is maintained in the DMS and used for investigative purposes by law enforcement personnel. So like I said, when I started doing this, I went to a training. It's an 8-hour training put on by LACRIS. So once the person that goes to the training is complete, then they have access to the system and are able to use the software. In 2019, there's an Assembly Bill 1215 that went into effect, requiring law enforcement to prohibit from installing or activating any biometric surveillance system in connection with the officer's body-worn camera. So we updated our Pasadena police policy and put the wording in that you see there under policy 450.6.3. Next slide, please. So currently, we use legally obtained surveillance footage, and from there, we'll get still images, and also from public resources or disseminated flyers from surrounding agencies. From those still images, during the investigation, we'll upload them into the LACRIS investigative system, and it'll give us possible matches where me as a face examiner now takes that data and compares it to the original photo. This is only an investigative tool and cannot be the sole basis for an arrest. So with that investigative tool, now I have to verify that person's person with the possible match by either their criminal history, eyewitness identification, DNA, emissions, fingerprints, or trace evidence that is found at the scene of the crime. How Pasadena uses this system, like I said, is an investigative tool only. We used to utilize mug books, which you hear, which is a series of photos And it would take a detective several hours, if not weeks, to go through all the mugshot photos to try and compare the video or the photo from the video surveillance with the mugshots. So basically, this system speeds it up for us and gets us possible matches where now the face examiner can take the still photo from the video surveillance and now compare it with these series of photos in the mugshot data system. During the auditing part of this, LACRIS currently audits their use of the system with login time, date searches, subject views, and then LACRIS conducts random audits in users and reports their findings. And LACRIS is part of the Department of Justice. And then the audit report data is compiled and stored at LACRIS for a minimum of 3 years. Any questions?
Does that conclude your report, sir?
It does, sir.
Thank you very much for your report, Sergeant Blanchard. Chief, is there anything more that you wanted to share for the moment?
Yeah, you know, it's important to know that there are a lot of public concerns when it comes to the use of this technology, and we realize that, we understand it, and we listen to those concerns. When it comes to accountabilities, as it comes to management controls and audits, it's important to have systems in place so we are treating this system with respect, and we are equally treating our community with respect in how we go through this. It's important to develop a policy that is not just in words, but in action for the community to ensure that we're careful about how we use this technology. When it comes to the amount of violence we have, the property crimes, missing people, it's just important for people to know it is valuable to us, and there is no part of this that includes social media scraping websites or anything else that's out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. My colleagues are, well, first, let me just ask for the record, how many public comments do we have to share?
There appears to be about 14. We did receive a large number that we don't have to read aloud, or that will be combined together. There was 27 that are very similar. We'll read one or two of those, and then there's probably another 12 that are unique and need to be read aloud because of their individuality.
Okay, I would ask my colleagues to help direct the chair. Would you like to hear from the public first, or would you like to have a round of questions if you have questions for the police chief? And hello?
The public first, if possible.
Turn us off.
Fine. Is that how the majority of the council would like to proceed, of the Public Safety Committee? Okay. So I'd ask the city clerk to share those comments.
Thank you, Chair. So I will start with the comments that are very similar, and I'll read two of them, and then I'll read the names of those that have submitted. They all start pretty much as follows. It is entirely possible for Pasadena to outright ban facial recognition without passing a separate transparency and accountability ordinance. Any attempt to pass a surveillance oversight ordinance will legitimize surveillance and create pathways that police will use to introduce and win approval of new surveillance. We reject that. The community does not consent to surveillance. The ACLU trusts police to self-audit and self-govern, which has been repeatedly proven incapable to lead to proper accountability of wrongdoing. Surveillance has been used to criminalize the Northwest community, the most segregated, policed, and rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods in the city. Any creation of a surveillance bureaucracy only furthers the legitimization and expansion of policing technology to be used to further this anti-Black, anti-immigration, racist displacement. Please ban facial recognition software. And if you'll indulge me, I'll read one more. It is entirely possible for Pasadena to outright ban facial recognition without passing a separate transparency and accountability ordinance. Any attempt to pass a surveillance oversight ordinance will legitimize surveillance and create pathways that police will use to introduce and win approval of new surveillance. History shows that laws facilitating the use of police technology will be used to establish new oppression. We reject any attempt to pass a surveillance oversight ordinance and create more bureaucracy. Laws like this presume that policing can be reduced with new rules and criteria when we know that this just leads police to invest more resources and personnel into monitoring and avoiding compliance. Over time, this will make surveillance harder to dismantle. Surveillance has been used to criminalize the Northwest community, the most segregated, policed, and rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods in the city. Any creation of a surveillance bureaucracy only furthers the legitimization and expansion of policing technology to be used to further this anti-Black, anti-immigration, racist displacement. The people of Pasadena will not sit by passively while you enact policies that actively harm us. Reject the transparency and accountability ordinance. And so the individuals who submitted these and similar comments, Geneva West, Van Nuys, Shannon Larsuel, Pasadena, Lillian Vasquez Gardena, Jania QE, Pasadena, Ben V, Pasadena, Rohan Louise, Pasadena, Skylar Cummings, Los Angeles, Isabel Mascuch, Pasadena, Sarah Petrick, Brooklyn, New York, Amaryllis, Eagle Rock, Hamid Khan, Los Angeles, Catherine, it says Pasadena, but there's a 90041 zip code. Rodrigo G, Pasadena. James White, Pasadena. Jeremy Taylor, Jacksonville, Oregon. Rachel, Pasadena. Ivy Denham Conroy, Los Angeles. Lydia Crumper, Pasadena. Callie K. Hoffman, Los Angeles. Xiomara Rodriguez, Los Angeles. Taryn Benista, Pasadena. Alyssa, Los Angeles. Jordan Jace, Los Angeles. Ann Lisa Delgado, Los Angeles. Amanda Medina Segura, Pasadena. Andres Isaac Guerrero, Glendale. Madeline Giles, Pasadena. Min Kim, Pasadena. June Williams, Pasadena. So those were the 27 that were in common. Valerie will start to read the others.
Jessica Hassin, Pasadena resident. My name is Jessica Hassin, and I'm a Pasadena resident who also serves on the Human Services Commission for District 7. I believe in the advancement of technology and innovation. I do not, however, believe in using flawed technology that disproportionately affects people of color, in particular facial recognition software. The technology has historically been deployed in lower income, non-white neighborhoods. As the documentary Coded Bias illustrated, most facial recognition software failed to identify dark skin tones and the faces of women, thereby surfacing the inherent bias in AI and algorithms, putting at least 52% Pasadenians at risk. Not only that, but this area brings attention to serious concerns on privacy, algorithm bias, and the lack of regulation. BIPOC are subject to more unwarranted rights-violating surveillance and false identifications, thereby increasing the chances of law enforcement misidentifying individuals. This has led to deportation, false arrests, and countless other mistakes that negatively impact our communities. In its present state, this technology should not be used by law enforcement or any public law enforcement agency. It would be morally irresponsible to do so. I urge you to use your authority and influence to remove and prohibit the use of this technology in our communities. Eva Dal Lana, Eagle Rock resident. I stand with the Black-led movement locally and nationally, demanding a ban on facial recognition and all forms of police surveillance. The people of Pasadena and Northeast LA do not need accountability or transparency. They need the defunding and abolition of the police. Andrew Culp, Eagle Rock resident. We need nothing short of the completely abolition of the police. The ACLU's proposed ordinance will only offer a rubber stamp for more policing. No to facial recognition, no to surveillance, no to agenda item number 2. Callie V, Pasadena resident. I am a citizen of Pasadena and an educator. I do not consent to your use of facial recognition. We do not have honest and transparent oversight to continue the use of facial recognition. Not only is this a small city with no need for this wasteful tool, facial recognition further expands the racist, overreaching, and over-policing of the Northwest District of Pasadena. The city should not only vote down the transparency ordinance, but discontinue the use of facial recognition outright. Tiffany, Pasadena resident. Hi there. I agree that Pasadena PD should not have use of facial recognition technology, but I disagree that there should be a surveillance ordinance created with police. I do not think police should be able to surveil residents, as we have seen what happens when this is allowed. It is abused by police, regardless of what safeguards or transparency measures are in place. Please do not create an ordinance for the police and do not invest more time and funds in police surveillance technology. As a resident of Pasadena with the family here, I am against this. Thank you.
Audrey George, Pasadena. Pasadena can and should enact a ban outright facial recognition without passing a separate transparency and accountability ordinance. Surveillance bureaucracy, however, presumes the community wants to be surveilled. So long as the state follows a heavy stacked process, pretends to consider input, and checks off a few baseline legal requirements. Any attempt to pass a surveillance oversight ordinance will legitimize surveillance, create a new unnecessary bureaucracy, and create pathways that police will use to introduce and win approval of new surveillance. We reject that. Laws like this presume that policing can be reduced with new rules and criteria, when we know this just leads police to invest more resources and personnel into monitoring and avoiding compliance. Over time, this will make surveillance harder to dismantle. I fervently reject any type of surveillance ordinance. From Anihoa, Pasadena. During the Pasadena City meeting on policing last 10th of June, the chief of police mentioned a collaboration with a technology company that would, quote, help police officers make better decisions before they even get out of the car, end quote. Details about such collaboration must be shared with the public. I'm aware of the existence of at least 2 types of software currently used by the police that have been proven to be widely problematic. Recidivism scoring systems that predict the likelihood of a convicted criminal to commit another crime in the future, and predictive policing systems that, quote, determine algorithmically where and when a crime is likely to occur, when police should monitor certain neighborhoods and zones, and whether a given crime constitutes gang activity, end quote. Both systems have been proven to be dangerously biased. PredPol, a predictive policing system used by LAPD, relies on a data set that, quote, mistakenly included 42 gang member names with birth dates of 1-year-old or younger. End quote. Collaborations between Pasadena police and technology companies should be disclosed to the public, carefully analyzed by subject matter experts, and continuously monitored to ensure it does not increase existing inequalities based on race, income class, and physical abilities. Thank you. Yada Younce, Pasadena. The use of facial recognition software by Pasadena Police PD should be stopped immediately. It is alarming on several fronts that Pasadena PD and city allowed the use of facial recognition technology that has been proven to be unreliable, discriminatory, and a threat to the civil rights of Pasadena citizens. As a founder of a tech company that utilized facial recognition software to confirm an individual's identity, I can personally attest to the severe limitations of this technology. I know because I personally gathered data to work on reducing the bias and discrimination against people of color by the software. This technology is not ready for mainstream use and should not be used in Pasadena. Pasadena government kept this tech on the down low and prohibited citizens from proactively expressing their opinion or consent to surveillance. Even if the tech is free, Pasadena should not be used as a guinea pig or allow unfettered access of citizens to help improve tech companies' algorithms. Citizens should have the right to know how their data is being used and should have control over their data. Unaccountable surveillance and its potential exploitation prevents citizens from living safe, fulfilling lives, and is a threat to civil rights.
City Clerk,
Yes.
would you happen to have an email and a telephone number for the last speaker?
It's possible. For Yada Younce, I will look it up, Councilmember Kennedy. And did you want me to share it with you?
Yes, please.
All right, we will make a note of that.
Thank you.
Sure. For Marla Tosher, Pasadena. The city of Pasadena has been using facial recognition technology for at least a few years, but without any regulation or restrictions or transparency for that matter. There are cameras at the Rose Bowl that take photos of faces entering the facility during events. Does anyone know where those photos go? Who uses that and for what reasons? Has there been any serious effort by anyone in the city government to study the impact of use of facial recognition surveillance technology? There are significant problems with the use of facial recognition technology, particularly with the issue of its accuracy. The error rates with technology are high in general, but even higher with respect to people of color, women, and other groups. The use of facial recognition technology also raises important questions of civil rights and due process that must be considered. The harm to civil rights outweighs any potential benefit from facial recognition surveillance technology. The city of Pasadena and any of its public-private organizations should be prohibited from using such an invasive technology that is so ripe for opportunities for abuse and error. And then you want to go?
Mohammed Tassar, Pasadena resident. My name is Mohammed Tassar, a member of the Pasadena Privacy for All Coalition. Facial recognition is an inherently biased, flawed, and invasive technology that should be out of PPD's hands. I write to respond to 2 points that the Sergeant and PPD will be making today. First, they claim we shouldn't worry because facial recognition is an investigative tool only and cannot be used as the sole bias for an arrest. This is not a limitation at all, since all techniques, even dangerous or racist ones, are used for re-investigations only. And just about everything PPD does is an investigation, nor is PPD's statement confronting, since police often rely on multiple considerations to make an arrest. Detroit Police Department had the exact same policy, yet they have on numerous occasions falsely arresting Black men because of facial recognition errors. Second, PPD says the tech will reduce imminent threats to health and safety, but that has never been proved, and certainly not compared to existing less intrusive techniques. Larry D. Adori, Pasadena resident. I want to be sure the committee is aware that it is not only the PPD, but also other city departments that use facial recognition. In particular, the Rose Bowl owned and controlled by the city via an NPO is engaged in extensive use of FR for surveillance of event attendees. A Star News article on June 23rd covered its use during the January 1st game this year. In the Rose Bowl Operating Company, CEO George Cunningham claimed that it was only for marketing purposes. That may be true regarding the specific contract about which the newspaper inquired. But now a PRA request for ACLU has revealed that in February 2017, the RBOC planned to deploy 416 cameras at 104 metal detectors to capture multiple views of each attendee, and to have all checked by FR against databases of undesirable people. They also plan to share their data with other SoCal entertainment venues. We need to ban on use of FR in Pasadena, not only by PPD, but by all entities connected to the city. Gordon Zhang, Los Angeles resident. I believe the use of facial recognition by any corporate or government entity on normal citizens is un-American and a violation of our collective privacy.
Kaden Gura, Pasadena. I don't want a surveillance ordinance because police should not be using surveillance on people to begin with, and they, police, are not honest with the things they already have. Setting up an ordinance will just make it seem like we have control over what they are doing, but we don't and we won't. Please don't create an ordinance for police, but instead invest money in communities, not policing. That's what we want, not more police surveillance. David Chavez, Pasadena. I am writing today to call on the Public Safety Committee to ban the racist and junk science of facial recognition technology by the PPD and all city entities. Doing so is a first step toward dismantling the embedded racism of policing and surveillance in our city. We are in a historic moment to transform public safety away from the current policing and incarceration regime. We must transform the status quo in which the U.S. holds 25% of all people incarcerated globally, with majority Black and people of color. Listen to community and science, not the PPD. Last month, IBM ended making facial recognition technology for law enforcement, saying it violates, quote, basic human rights and freedoms, end quote. Furthermore, MIT's Media Lab also concluded that it has been used by police to, quote, undermine humane rights and to harm Black people specifically, as well as indigenous people and other people of color, end quote. Both San Francisco and Oakland have banned the use of this racist technology to protect civil and human rights. Surveillance laws and technology historically have targeted Black peoples in this country and perpetuated white supremacy. Our city should not regulate or oversee racist technology, but instead must ban and dismantle it. And the last public comment from Marlon Savinelli, Los Angeles. I believe Pasadena should ban the blatant disregard of our civil rights that is facial recognition. This issue has already been raised in various cities and towns across the country, and the consequences are already making themselves known. We reject any attempt to bolster the already bloated state surveillance system. And that completes public comment on this item.
I believe the chair had to step away and he asked me to take the gavel. Are there questions by the vice mayor or the mayor? Mayor, please.
Yeah, Chief, there seems to be a disconnect between the PowerPoint presentation. I know this is an information item only. It's not for action, but most of the comments that we've just heard relate to surveillance application. The presentation was about what sounded on the face of it to be a pretty modest facial recognition tool to really accelerate processing of images and comparing them to mug books. To me, at least, to be pretty benign. But the question that it does raise for me is, and I appreciate the policies that you've shown, the policy that shows that our policies are in conformity with state legislation. But what if the police department decided to launch some surveillance application, some broader surveillance, true surveillance, not just facial recognition, mugbook comparisons, what would the process for that be? How is that vetted? Does that come to public safety? Would it come to public safety? I mean, what is the process for the police department to incorporate new technologies, true surveillance technologies, before it's implemented in the field?
So my approach as chief here for the city of Pasadena is to bring all these topics to public safety. I have a lineup of topics to bring, and anything we start that's new, any new technology that we have, we would in fact bring it to public safety. There's a cost factor to these in itself, whether it lands at the finance committee or it lands here with public safety. Anyway, it needs to get up to the council for approval on the agenda items. There's no way to avoid it not coming to council. And these are big discussions. And I think it's important for us to realize we don't just implement it and then do it. I understand how it's happened in the past. That's not how we are operating. There are laws that prevent us from acting without having approval. There are policy changes that are required that would likely bring not only public safety, but to my chief's advisory or any future policing commission. But at the same time, much of the confusion keeps it centered on the false views of surveillance. These are booking photographs, number one. Secondarily, we're talking about what you're hearing in the studies are based on 2 studies out of Georgetown and another with big technology companies that really focus on a fixed study that talks about a specific area of measurement, and it doesn't apply to this. We're not looking at the identification of people. The studies are focused on the identification of people. We are not doing that. We are focused on just that first step to finding out in the booking system for LA County any possible matches. There's a ton of investigative steps that have to take place to avoid, and if we don't do this, talk about losing time, I'm returning my detectives and people from the community to come sit and look through mug books until they find somebody they think is the person, and then we would start at that point the way we would start today. And I think that's the confusion. So I do support the community's concern with, again, the accountabilities, the control, that has to be done. And I have no problem working with recommendations from my chief's advisory to listen to some of those recommendations. But a lot is being done at the county level with this type of work to understand the studies and what we're trying to do. So a lot of misinformation and, you know, certain groups have gotten out ahead of it to just make sure everybody believes it's surveillance. It absolutely isn't. It's unfortunate we've gotten to that point. We are using in Pasadena, you read the article, you can pay for your meal by walking in and recognizing your face, called Pops Pay, I think it's called. Here in Pasadena, we're getting national attention for this technology, but yet, you know, when it comes to violence and things that we want to become a better community, we're actually going backwards. I understand the policies for Seattle and Portland. I think we could measure what's going for them. If we want to go that route, open door, they probably, you know, we could do that here as well. But we are trying to balance our efforts with the community to truly understand and work with them to have good technology that helps all of us make it a safer community. And that really is the effort.
Nothing further, Mr. Chair.
Questions from my colleagues? Thank you, Mr. Madison.
No, I just wanted to say that's exactly. I think the mayor put it all together. I mean, when I'm seeing what is in our agenda today and what the comments are based on, it doesn't sound like they're the same thing. It sounds as if the comments are related to SPD driving around, taking pictures of people, and then arresting them for potential crimes that they may have. Is that a fair characterization of what my other colleagues or maybe even the mayor is hearing from the public comments?
Yes, surveillance is not facial recognition. That is the biggest difference. I mean, we're looking again, we all remember the Cheesecake Factory incident in 2017. We are looking for that suspect still. We have national attention on trying to find that. And we're almost saying that it's okay if the Cheesecake Factory suspect strikes again. That's less important to the type of technology we use to try to identify somebody that matches it. The facial recognition and what we're using and the term of surveillance and scraping people's social media and doing it that way. I don't like that. I don't support that. There's issues in our private lives none of us would like anyways when we're traveling around. So it's, why would we with this type of technology?
If there is technology, as you mentioned, Chief, if there is some sort of change, and also this would be to the city manager, if there is some sort of change where we start, not we, but the police department starts using facial recognition, would that come to the council prior to the implementation?
It would come to us immediately. And in fact, you guys know me pretty well. On next month, I'll get back to my chief's reports. I could add things like this to our chief's report to talk about how many we've identified and what we're doing in terms of using this type of technology. Anything beyond this, it would come to public safety. It would come to the commission. It will come somewhere where it needs to be for us to have approval. I truly understand as a chief of police, we police at the consent of our community. If tomorrow you took away our tasers and our guns and said, go police, you may be operating with 4 or 5 police officers for students, but we do police to the consent of the community and what we do. And this is the community we speak to in terms of the council and the commissions.
And something like that, for example, let me just ask this question. Do you have the hardware to even begin surveilling in that manner?
Not even close. Not even close.
So that would be something that would have to be purchased in the city, and then it would ultimately come to the city council anyhow.
And it's not cheap. So that would mean.
Yeah, I know it's not cheap.
Right, Vice Mayor, any acquisition that exceeds $75,000 would need to be presented to the city council for its approval. You have my commitment. I'm not aware of us using any technology other than what the chief and the sergeant outlined today. You have my personal commitment that we would not implement any new technology without first coming to the city council. And if we were to do it, as the chief indicates, it's expensive, so we'd probably need to bring it to you anyway. I think what we're dealing with to large measure is a public perception of the use of technology that our department is not employing, but there seems to be either a concern that we will or a misunderstanding that we are.
Okay, and then to my colleagues on the city, the Public Safety Committee. So I have the ultimate trust in our police chief as well as the city manager in saying that they're going to do this. But realistically, I'm not going to be, there's no guarantee that I'll be here in the next 30 seconds. And there's no guarantee that our police chief or our city manager would either, and they've said that they are going. So is there a policy that is put in place, because there's no guarantee that I'm going to be here either? Is there a policy that's put in place that says any significant changes like this, and I'm not on the Legend Policy Committee, that any significant changes like this to any department would be raised to the city council level or committee level before implementation?
Absolutely. Vice Mayor, everything I do is supposed to last longer than my tenure. Nothing I do is supposed to be for my benefit. It's supposed to be for the long-term community and for this police department. I expect to be out of here one day. I got 35 years in, 36 years start. I'm at the end. I get to be gone tomorrow or next week. So I got to ensure everything that's being done around me will sustain that. And part of that is we do have, number one, we have laws that prevent us from doing certain things and using it in certain ways, like AB 1215. We can't use our body-worn camera data for facial recognitions. We know that, so why would we do it? We need technology to purchase to make sure everything goes into that system. I can't do that without having the approval from the council and the city manager and doing that as well. We do have a draft policy in place. I will bring to public safety. They could look at it and people give recommendations on that. I'll feed it to my police advisory committee because they don't play. In this room, they will tell me how they feel, and they have made changes based on their recommendations. This is not a game to anybody. This is very serious for us to try to balance the safety of our community and arresting known suspects and really getting to a point where we don't misuse technology in a way that becomes surveillance or doing it secretly, in some way that's not being shared with the community. That's not my intent or the intent of this police department or our philosophy. I know it's hard. It's difficult for people to accept that and the social movement going on and what's happening, so I don't ignore that. But it's an important, critical conversation that we balance both sides so we have better prevention of public safety, so we're in a better place a year or 2 years from now.
No, so I appreciate Chief you chiming in. And once again, I think that the question was more so on the policy level. I'm not on the policy and legislation committee, but I think this is something that the policy should look at as potential, significant changes within any department. Absolutely. And this question is more so directed at the mayor and not you, Chief. So I appreciate you chiming in. And I was just wondering, at legend policy, would you be able to bring up a policy that says exactly what the city manager is saying and what our police chief is saying? Because there's no guarantee that, like I said, there's no guarantee that I'm going to be here in the next 30 seconds. And I don't want to sound morbid or anything like that, but I have trust in our police chief and trust in our city manager that they say they're going to do this because it's in public record. But we could have another city manager, we could have another police chief, and who knows? I mean,
And if I may, Vice Mayor.
No time is granted, right? So I just want to, as we're looking at policy changes, this is something that should be citywide and something that should look beyond me as well as you, Mayor Twin.
Sure, and if I may, before the mayor speaks, I just want to mention, Vice Mayor, so certainly the council could make a policy pronouncement. It could adopt a resolution making a statement that it is against the use of certain technologies. That I don't believe would bind a future council, of course, and the city attorney could opine. Also, to the extent, and there was some discussion in the public comment about some applications that were employed at the Rose Bowl Operating Company, any legislation that the city council considers that would have an impact on the Rose Bowl Operating Company, they're required to submit it to the RBOC for its consideration, I think 60 days prior to its adoption. So I just wanted to point out there. So the council could certainly make a strong policy statement in this area if it wanted to. Again, at a practical level, any acquisition above $75,000 would have to come to the council for its approval. The council could certainly always say no. Obviously, staff takes to heart the comments that it hears from the public as well as the council members. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Let me answer the vice.
Yeah, and it's not against facial recognition because I actually think that this is a tool that could be helpful. I don't think that this tool is something that is been vetted out, and the software is forever changing, especially when it comes to the faces of African Americans, minorities. Depending on where it is developed, it works great. If it's developed in China, it works great for Asians, and that may not work great for Caucasian males, may not work great for African Americans. If it's developed in America, it may work great for Caucasian males, but maybe not so great for, it's kind of based on the developer. And so the reason I mention this is I believe that is a tool that could be used to closing cases. And there's proof that it has been used in closing cases, but that any significant change like this is something that comes to the city council and not necessarily, because like I said, and not to be morbid about anything here again, there's no guarantee that we're all going to be here. So it should be for the next council to know that, this was something that the community was really strong about at this time. And if they want to decide to move forward with something, that discussion be had at the council level.
Yeah, Vice Mayor, this, to my mind, sort of cuts across a couple of jurisdictions. Let me talk to staff about this and the city attorney's office and come back on it. I'll report back.
And I just want to be clear that this is not a on facial recognition. This is just
No, I understand.
policy overall.
Yeah, the
overall.
larger policy issue. I understand the larger issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, my colleagues. I have a series of questions, John, Chief Perez, and possibly you've answered them, so you can be very brief if you've already answered it. I have to step away for a moment. On this facial recognition technology, is it true that it has been in use in the Pasadena Police Department since 2017?
We have used, yes, 2017, we used a vigilant system, which is uses driver's license from different states and puts them into a database. And in 2019, we stopped using that. And we currently use, for the last 3 years, 4 years, we use the LACRA system, which is one we're talking about for booking photographs. And that's the one we currently use and have been using.
Is there any evidence or is there any corroboration that you are aware of that facial recognition systems as a system are inherently biased to women and to darker skinned individuals?
So in the beginning, that was the case, and that is not the case today. Now, again, you have to understand the difference between facial recognition systems and what we're doing in trying to identify people as a start point. Our start point in putting a photograph into a system on possible matches is the beginning, that less than 1% of 100% investigation. The facial recognition is identifying people in a system to saying that is your person, nothing further to do, that's it. That system started with many, many different challenges. And as you look at the technology advancements today, that's not quite the case anymore. However, we are not talking about that system. It's very important to make a divide between what you're talking about and what this system is doing.
So,
Can I say something, sir?
yes, sir.
As far as the different systems out there, LACRA's, their technologies have increased about 3 or 4 times since they've implemented it. But the main thing is the human factor. The Georgetown study didn't have somebody examining the photos after the fact. How our investigative process works is we'll take a still photo from a video surveillance system or a still photo of somebody, we'll input it into the computer for the LACRA system, and then the possible matches, it takes a examiner, one that's gone through the training, and basically examine that photo with the possible matches. So the human factor and the detective takes all the bias out of that problem.
So, Sergeant, are you representing to the Public Safety Committee and the community that the system that we are employing in the city of Pasadena, in your research as the person the police chief has assigned to really help usher this in for our community, that it does not have the biases that many community organizations and individuals and those who spoke up today in the comment section of this particular issue, that those concerns are without merit, or do they have merit with the technology that we are employing in the city of Pasadena?
The technology that we're using through the LACRA system, that is correct. There is no bias.
Okay. So going forward, thank you very much, Sergeant.
And Chair, we have to, stand by our comments and be responsible for the comments we make to the public and to you. Otherwise, we don't belong in the chairs that we're sitting on this side.
Agreed. Chief, is there a way for you to put out in your reports, put out through the city manager's report, and broader in the era of seeking greater transparency, some brief report, meaning a paragraph or so, in focus or some communication that would be broadly provided to the community, just the facts, just the facts. I think if you do that, even if someone is on the wrong side and sharing information inaccurately, we can direct them to empirical data that may help them change their opinion about what we're doing under your leadership in the Pasadena Police Department.
Absolutely. We've done it in the past and we'll do it going forward in fall 2019. The Policing 101 series we developed a couple years ago. We brought people from the community and the media in to educate and to answer questions and to listen. So that went well. And we've also used this with the Chief's Advisory, and we could move forward as well to continue to do that to ensure that it goes out even further via social media and other platforms.
So I would, if I may, if no member of the committee has further questions for our police chief, I would simply say, Police Chief Perez, that the more transparency we bring to this issue, the greater participation in terms of accepting the work that you're doing will be demonstrated. You will receive kudos, I think, in the direction that you have said that the department is going in under your leadership. So I'm glad you expect us to hold you accountable. That has been your pronouncement from the day that you were made deputy chief and certainly chief of the Pasadena Police Department. Yes, sir. So we have high expectations for your continued leadership. And in all fairness, we must say that we will be vigilant, as you are vigilant, in terms of responding to the legitimate concerns of our constituents.
Absolutely.
Thank you. With that, I want to say thank you to the sergeant, thank you to the chief for that presentation. I'd invite the city manager to tee up information only item 3, on-street dining and parklet safety consideration.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Kennedy. I think we're admitting Joaquin Siquez into the meeting, so he'll be coming online in just a moment. I want to remind the committee before the presentation that this is a pretty focused presentation relating to the safety considerations regarding on-street dining and the parklets. The Ed Tech committee dealt with the broader issue of on-street dining, and with the admonition of the city attorney's office, we know that today's presentation needs to focus solely on the safety considerations. So to talk about how we ensure the safety of in-street dining is Joaquin Siquez, our newly crowned Deputy Director of the Transportation Department.
Welcome, Joaquin, and congratulations on your new appointment, well-deserved. And like I said to the police chief, expectations are high, and we look forward to your success. Please continue.
Thank you, Chair Kennedy, and thank you, members of the Public Safety Committee tonight. As Mr. Mermel announced, I'll be discussing the on-street dining and parking safety considerations and really focusing on the safety aspect of on-street dining and parklets. Next slide, please. As an overview, I'll talk briefly about the program and then discuss a little bit about managing risk and what we do as traffic engineers to manage that risk, discuss the best practices that we looked at nationwide and locally, evaluate some of the collision history that we received, and then talk about the location selection criteria for on-street dining and parklets, the barriers that we're using, and speed reduction strategies as they relate to the safety of the on-street dining and parklets. Quickly, some background is the on-street dining has been implemented in 15 block spaces in Pasadena to allow restaurants to provide open-air sit-down dining. And both on-street dining and parklets are part of various open-air dining options that restaurants have, including dining in parking lots, alleys, and sidewalk dining. Next slide, please. whenever we consider safety of infrastructure or design, we're really talking about managing a risk. And a large part of that is the identification of potential hazards. Every day, as we walk, we bike, we take transit, we're faced with risk. And as engineers, and really the stewards of the public right-of-way, our role is to identify the risk and reduce the likelihood of any event causing injury. Part of that is reducing exposure. So to reduce the likelihood of an event occurring, and should an incident occur, we want to be able to reduce the severity of the event by looking at the exposure for the different types of events. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we talk about collision rates and types of barriers. But another part of this is the human factors component and how the environment impacts motorist speed and driver behavior. Items like umbrellas and pedestrian activity in on-street dining and parklets, the view corridors that we create, that really reminds motorists of the multimodal nature of the street and the fact that there's pedestrians adjacent to a roadway, and that impacts how motorists behave and the speed that they travel through corridors. Next slide, please. To talk a little bit about our roadway network before we get into the details of the design, I want to briefly provide an overview of our traffic volumes and collision rates within Pasadena as part of the current safer at home conditions. If we look at the traffic volumes, beginning in March when we initiated the safer at home orders, there was a 60% reduction in traffic volume compared to the previous period of March 15th through April 15th. As we've continued through month by month, we've noticed that in the period starting June 15th for that month, that reduction is now down to 37%. So we are seeing traffic volumes beginning to increase. Definitely no means getting back to the levels of pre-COVID, but we are seeing some increase in the traffic volumes. In addition, we looked at collision rates. In March, if we compare the March 2020 collision rates versus the March 29 collision rates, we'll see a similar reduction of 60% reduction in collisions between 2019 and 2020. In June, that reduction really parallels the reduction in traffic volumes, and it's a 30% collision rate between June 2019 and 2020. And this again gets to the point of exposure and how many times the number of collisions are in line with traffic volumes because of the exposure at intersections and on streets. However, one of the other points that I wanted to point out was the mode choice. We are seeing more pedestrians and bicyclists using not only neighborhood streets for recreation, but also getting to places and locations to and from central districts using different modes other than vehicles. Next slide, please. So we began the process of developing a design for on-street dining and parklets with the review of the current national guidelines. These include the Institute of Transportation Engineers Curbside Management Practitioners Guide, shown on the left, and also the National Association of City Transportation Officials Urban Street Design Guide, shown on the right. Parklets and on-street dining aren't necessarily new. They've been around for years, and these national documents provide good guidance on the design and how they can be implemented and what the design parameters should be. Next slide, please. We then looked at the best practices at a more local level, but really focus on the design. So we moved from national guidance and then reached out to agencies throughout the nation and locally, and we reviewed both design plans, and we actually looked at implementations of local on-street dining and parklets to be able to better define design standards that we felt would exceed the minimum safety standards and ended up being what we're using here in Pasadena for our on-street dining and parklet programs. And you'll see the list of agencies there that we looked at their design standards. Next slide, please. From there, we also did a review of the collision history. So as we were conducting research on best practices, we also reached out to obtain information on collisions for on-street dining and parklet implementations. We received information from the 7 agencies listed on the slide here, from Los Angeles and Glendale to Long Beach being our local agencies, as well as Bend, Oregon, Concord, New Hampshire, Grand Forks, North Dakota, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And for over 210 installations that were represented during this research, there was only one collision that was reported across all of the agencies. And this was a DUI that occurred at 4 a.m., so there were no injuries reported based on that collision. It should be noted here that there have been no collisions reported in Pasadena to date, and we've been had the installation in for just a month, but just wanted to include that here as part of the slide. So the collision history of on-street dining demonstrates really a low number of incidents, and I believe a major factor of that is the determination of where to install on-street dining and parklets. Next slide, please. And when the city developed the on-street dining application and the temporary parklet application, we looked at various selection criteria to really minimize the risk and reduce the exposure for these types of implementations. One of the things that we looked at, obviously, was the speed along the streets. We looked at locations for on-street dining with speed limits at or under 30 miles an hour. We looked at locations with available alternate or detour routes. And the reason for this is we wanted to be able to give people the ability to drive around on-street dining or congestion that may result from on-street dining, and give them other options to get around that area as opposed to being stuck in a corridor and maybe trying to do some risky behavior in an area where they're in on-street dining. We also looked at traffic signal spacing. So the proximity of the traffic signals and their spacing plays a key role, because the presence of adjacent traffic signals allows for the city to really better control speeds along the corridors using the signal timing. For parklets, we only permit existing parking spaces and only at locations with speed limits 25 miles per hour. And I guess this would be a good point to really define the difference between on-street dining and parklets. On-street dining is a closure that's within the street at the street level, so that basically somebody has to step off into the street in order to be in the on-street dining area. A parklet is an extension of the sidewalk. It's the same level as the sidewalk, and it's flush with the sidewalk, and it becomes really an extension of sidewalk dining. Next slide, please. So now that we move into kind of the details of the Pasadena implementations, I'm going to start talking about some of the traffic control that goes into the approach of the on-street dining, specifically the striping, the barrier striping on the approach, as you can see in the picture on the top right. On the picture on the lower left, you'll see the right turn only lanes that are on the approaches to these on-street dining. On-street dining typically requires the removal of a travel lane, and instead of allowing merging to occur in the block of the on-street dining or in front of, we create right turn only lanes so people can get around the closure if they're looking to get to an alternate or detour route. All that, the striping also comes with associated signage, which includes the through traffic merge left signs and the right lane must turn right signs. In addition to the static signage, we also implement the portable changeable message signs, which are the electronic signs that have the same message of through traffic merge left and right lane must turn right. And those signs are in place typically for 2 weeks for every implementation. So as motorists start driving up to these locations, they see the changing conditions and are alerted with an electronic sign. Also, as part of the traffic control, you'll see the delineators, those orange delineators with the reflective bands on top, and that provides additional visibility of the closure, but also helps with the on the approach, people being able to see that that lane is no longer a travel lane, but is now occupied with on-street dining. Next slide, please. So with the phase 1 implementation that occurred on July 11th, we began with water-filled barricades. These are, when filled, they weigh about 1,200 pounds. They're 6 feet long. They provide for ease of implementation as far as the deployment, speed, and cost. and they are rated for roadways with 25-mile-an-hour speed limits and are used throughout the state for on-street dining. After that first implementation, we moved towards a concrete K-rail implementation for the phase 2 and all the other subsequent phases for on-street dining. And those are the images on the bottom there. And these are rated for higher speeds and provide a higher level of protection, but also require longer time to implement and install. But as we went through and identified the additional locations where we would be installing these, we thought that was the appropriate decision to make to move forward with the concrete K-rails. These are rentals, so as we move out of the rental period for the orange water-filled barriers, we will be replacing those with the concrete K-rails, similar to the ones on the bottom, and that should occur within the next month. And as one of the things that happens, though, is when we install the concrete K-rails, we have to account for not just the pedestrian safety, but also the motorist safety. These concrete K-rails, again, at 5,000 pounds apiece, when they're lined up like this in a line, create a blunt object at the end. So if a vehicle were to lose control and hit the end of one of these treatments, it could cause significant damage. As such, we put these crash cushions, in this case, the sled crash cushion, at the end as the end treatment for these concrete K-rails to not only protect the pedestrians within the closure, but actually protect the motorist if one loses control and ends up striking one of these barriers. Next slide, please. In addition to the sleds, those yellow end treatments to concrete barriers, we also use vehicle arresting barriers at the end treatments, specifically at the beginning of the blocks where we don't have parking in advance of the on-street dining, but also at other locations and at our water-filled barrier locations. And these vehicle arresting barriers are there to stop a vehicle as they approach, obviously before they impact the concrete K-rail. One of the other benefits that we have as a barrier, one of the benefits of our current layout is that we provide angled parking adjacent to on-street dining. So from a barrier standpoint, the parked car provides another layer of protection as a physical object between the on-street dining area and an errant vehicle that may lose control and enter into this area of on-street dining. Next slide, please. The angled parking not only provides physical separation and barrier for the on-street dining, but also helps us as part of a speed reduction strategy. Angled parking reduces the speed of the corridor because vehicles enter and exit the parking spaces, causing friction to slow down the corridor traffic. Another speed reduction strategy that we use, and I've mentioned it before, is our traffic signal spacing. This allows us to control speed through the traffic signal timing by not creating green bands of traffic through these corridors, being able to really filter the traffic through these corridors. And it's been an effective tool for us at these locations where we've installed our on-street dining to keep the speeds down. A third component and another critical piece is the enforcement component for not only distracted driving, but U-turns. What we want to avoid is risky behavior within these corridors that may lead to a collision that would then ricochet or end up in a on-street dining area. So enforcement of risky behavior, of distracted driving, people on their cell phones, and U-turns where they're not permitted is a key component. And through all this, I probably should have started with, we have worked closely with the police department and the fire department in the implementation and the request for enforcement of these corridors. Next slide, please. So a majority of what I've been focusing on is the on-street dining. The other component of our dining is the parklets. And as I had mentioned, these are really an extension of the sidewalk. So it's similar to our sidewalk dining that we allow on the sidewalk, but these are extended into the parking lane. They don't have a physical crash barrier like the K-rail shown on the other plans for on-street dining that's further out into the street, but they do allow for parking on both sides and they must utilize an existing parking space, which helps reduce the likelihood of an end collision to one of these parklets. They are restricted to streets of 25 miles per hour, and they require that we'll stop again for even a slow-moving vehicle that may back up into that parklet area. So last slide, please. So really in conclusion, some of the things that we'll be doing as we implement more of these on-street dining and as we monitor the locations is constantly monitoring the traffic volumes and the capacity for alternate routes. It's key that as these are implemented and people either divert around congestion or drive through it, that we want to make sure that while we're slowing speeds, we're not causing basically gridlock that may have the unintended effect of risky behavior as people make U-turns or do things to get around them. We'll also be monitoring traffic speeds along these corridors to make sure that our speed reduction strategies are working and monitoring risky behavior. So that concludes my presentation, and I am open to any questions.
Thank you very much. If I may, I think I was one of the council members who had concerns, Mr. Siquez. One of the concerns I have still is there a way, and have you addressed adequately, the calming of the traffic so it would be rare that you could have someone exceeding 30 miles an hour on Colorado in the area where the off-street or dining or on-street dining is taking place?
So one of the strategies, again, the speed reduction is key, and that leads to that, we'd mentioned that exposure and that risk is using that signal control to manage the speeds and how fast people get through that quarter, because they'll be stopped at a red light and then 300 feet later, they'll be stopped at another red light. So they don't have that green band. That is one of the critical speed reduction strategies. The other component with the angled parking is that friction caused by vehicles entering and exiting the parking spaces really also helps reduce the speed. What we've noticed, and especially in the hours when we have more people dining in the on-street dining, the evening, the dinner hours and the lunch hours, the congestion caused by not only removing a travel lane, but also by some of our speed reduction strategies, really creates a low speed environment on those corridors. And that was our intent to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we're moving in the right direction. I just want to make sure those who are dining are as safe as we can make them safe with, period, as safe as we can make them safe. No elaboration beyond that. I want to make sure people feel safe, that we've thought it through, that we've looked at other communities that have had some issues or problems, and that we are taking that learning and implemented it in Pasadena. I do have a question about, do we own the concrete barriers?
We currently rent the concrete barriers.
Is it cost prohibitive if we continue to move as a city to memorialize this whole dining experience?
Councilmember Kennedy, let me jump in on that. I've been reviewing it with the transportation department. At a certain point, it probably does make sense to make an acquisition. We're pursuing some grant funds that we hope would help us. The timeline on learning whether we'll get the grant is a couple months out. So I suspect we're going to stay in the rental mode for a little while. And if we're fortunate enough to get the grant, then I definitely want to move forward with the acquisition. If we don't get the grant, then we have to really think about whether it makes sense to do the acquisition based on how long we think we'll be in this mode. Once we're no longer needing, let's say, so many K-rails, where will we store them? Do we have future need for them? There certainly is some application. Think about maybe replacing a water main in a street where it's not always the most productive thing to work part of the day and then close up the job site. Theoretically, if we had K-rail, we could block off a lane and leave it in that state for a while. So we're actively looking at this. We want to make the right dollars and cents decision. So it is something that the staff is pursuing. And then the other thing I do want to mention is there's recognition the K-rails are frankly not the most aesthetically pleasing. The council did provide some dollars to assist us in maybe making the areas look a little more inviting. I have seen pictures from other communities that frankly, they look nicer, but to the underlying concern of ultimate safety, I think they're lacking. And I think our concern, as you just said it, is to make sure that first and foremost, anyone in those areas have the maximum safety that we can provide them. And anything less than that is not acceptable. So we're hopeful working with the merchants, the restaurateurs, and some of them have been very creative, making them look a lot nicer, but safety first.
Okay, I might add that the overwhelming communications that I've received have been very positive about this activity. I don't make the assumption that's the case with what you all have received, but you suggested that it was well received. Has it been overwhelming, Mr. Sequez?
It has. It has been well received through all the different the districts, the business districts, and the different restaurants that we've been able to help by allowing on-street dining with the current closure of any indoor dining activity.
Thank you, my colleagues. Hearing no comment.
I'll just say, I did have one quick question, and it was related to, by the way, congratulations, Joaquin, on the promotion. That's amazing. Well deserved. You didn't mention it yesterday at the community meeting. I didn't know, but congratulations.
Thank you.
I would like to ask, have you heard of any incidents, or maybe even this is for the chief, any incidents where a car has collided in one of these?
So
in our city or any other city?
In our city, definitely not. In the other cities that we looked at, there were 210 installations through multiple years. Only one collision, and that was at 4 a.m. and it was a driving under the influence collision. So we're still looking for more data. The only data that's available for on-street dining or parklets. And we've reached out to various other cities, and even the ones that didn't provide specific data said none that they were aware of. So in addition to the list we have, there were 3 or 4 other cities that just couldn't recall one way or the other, but they were not aware of any with parklets.
And so during the presentation, this is not the first time I've received this presentation because we had it in EdTech as well. And I may have had, I think I did ask a similar question there as well. These are heavy enough to take a head-on collision or how far would they move would they move at all?
Yes, it depends on the type. So the water-filled barriers will deflect more, they will move more, and that's our intent to change those out with the concrete barriers. The concrete barriers are rated at a much higher speed than the water-filled, and at 5,000 pounds a piece, and they're pinned together, they will slightly move, but they're not going to move greatly when they're linked together like that. Hence the need for the crash cushion at the end.
And the rating is actually for head-on collisions and not necessarily a side, like if I drive past it and I hit it from the side if I sideswipe it.
It's actually rated for the side impact collision, and I'd have to take a look at the head-on collision that you're meaning at the end treatment. So what happens at our end treatments, because of either parking in advance that becomes the buffer, or the vehicle arresting barriers becomes another protection level there. We've kind of put the belt and suspenders on to make sure that at those end treatments that we are providing a high level of protection for pedestrians within that area.
And if possible, if you could look into what the rating would be for a head-on collision, I believe that would be helpful to report back to the council. And if it's not rated high enough, is there any way that we could install temporary brackets that would go into our asphalt, a few feet to make them even stronger for that type of collision so that they don't shift? I think Councilmember Kennedy is right on point, because we want to, and I mean, of course, anything could happen at any minute, but we want to try to present the most reasonably risk-averted situation that an outside diner could experience, so that our restaurateurs and our businesses, retail businesses, have places where people feel safe in a respectable manner. You know, safe is relative, where people feel like they can go out too. And so that information would be helpful. At least it'd be helpful for me.
Definitely, and again, the end treatments where there is the potential for a head-on collision or somebody picking up speed and going directly into the barriers. In addition to the concrete K-rail, we provide the vehicle arresting barriers, and those are rated to stop that level of intrusion of a kind of a head-on collision. So I'll get that information through the city manager to the Public Safety Committee.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. Thank you very much. Any member of the Public Safety Committee would like to continue? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Siquez, for that very thorough presentation. Before we go to asset forfeiture, and I think that will go very quickly, I'd like to return to facial recognition, and for the record, simply share the fact that Article June 9, 2020, IBM is pulling out of the facial recognition market and is calling for, quote, a national dialogue, end quote, on the technology's use in law enforcement. The abrupt about face comes as technology companies are facing increased scrutiny over their contracts with police amid violent crackdowns on peaceful protests across America. In a public letter to Congress, IBM Chief Executive Arvind Krishna explained the company's decision to back out of the business and declared an intention to, quote, to work with Congress in pursuit of justice and racial equity, focused initially in 3 key policy areas: police reform, responsible use of technology, and broadening skills and educational opportunities, end quote. The company, Krishna said, quote, no longer offers general purpose IBM facial recognition or analysis software. He goes on to say IBM firmly opposes and will not condone uses of any technology, including facial recognition technology offered by other vendors for mass surveillance, racial profiling, violation of basic human rights and freedoms, or any purpose which is not consistent with our values and principles of trust and transparency. He added, we believe now is the time to begin a national dialogue on whether and how facial recognition technology should be employed by domestic law enforcement agencies, end quote. So I would invite the city manager to take a look at the article. I will share the article with my colleagues by way of the city clerk. And if the city manager would be so kind to report back at the next meeting of the Public Safety Committee after he's actually had an opportunity to review the article shared with the police chief and see if anything on the presentation today needs to be modified. A simple sharing, couple minutes if there's nothing to be changed. But if you would wait at least and take a look at the article, it'd be greatly appreciated by me. I think we'd all learn a little bit.
Chair, I read that article and it, you know, you can't disagree with that statement. What we are using and what they're talking about, once again, are two separate areas. And it's been easy to market that as one and throw out the baby with the bathwater, and that's not what we're doing here. So the comments in that article, we were supportive of that and the concerns with it. More has to be done, but there's also an equal conversation, critical conversation that needs to take place across the country about what this is and what that is in terms of the IBM technology. We are going to start talking nationally as a Pasadena Police Department with other police chiefs. In September, we'll be hosting or we'll be part of a Zoom to talk with national police chiefs, many of them from big cities across this country, to talk about how to speak to this point. I don't think we're doing it correctly. I think many chiefs, many departments don't want to talk about it because we don't know how to talk about it. It's a very uncomfortable place to bring up a conversation one feels as very important, but you don't think anybody's going to hear you. And so many times we back out of that arena and don't have the conversation. This is critical. I think it's important when it comes to a lot more than just violent crime and how we use it. But I agree with that article and what it's stating about having a larger national conversation on that type of technology.
Okay, Chief, thank you very much. With that, I would invite the city manager to tee up item 4, asset forfeiture community reinvestment grant program, please.
Thank you, Councilmember Kennedy. Before we start, I'll mention that there is one public comment on this item, and it's my pleasure to turn it over to Lieutenant Marie Sell that will outline for the committee and the public a nice opportunity to provide some funding for the community. So with that, I'll turn it to Lieutenant Marie Sell.
I'll do a quick opening very quickly, boss, if I can.
Yes.
And just in short form here is that asset forfeiture, the money we seize, doesn't come from what the concern was a few years ago on street level narcotics and things like that. This is very large national, international investigations, cartel type, and it's time that we get back to our community with what we're doing. And what Lieutenant Sell will explain to you is the process in which we're doing that. Very few police agencies across this country are in fact doing this, and I believe we need to help our communities with our nonprofits grow and become better at what they do.
All right, good afternoon, members of the Public Safety Committee, and thank you for your time today. As the Chief mentioned, our Special Investigations section is what I'm currently managing, and the primary duties are the investigation and enforcement of narcotic and vice-related offenses in and around the city of Pasadena. And during these investigations, detectives can discover and eventually seize money that meets the criteria for asset forfeiture, and that falls under a Health and Safety Code 11470. The Pasadena Police Department, we process all of our seizures with the Department of Justice, and we follow the guidelines that are outlined in the equitable sharing. Next slide, please. The Department of Justice asset forfeiture programs are based, they will remove the tools of crime from criminal organizations. They deprive wrongdoers of proceeds of their crimes. They recover property that may be used to compensate victims, and they deter crime. One of the benefits of asset forfeiture is the potential to share monies with federal proceeds with cooperating state and local agencies. And this is done through their equitable sharing program. Next slide, please. So asset forfeiture programs, there are permissible uses and there's unpermissible uses. I'm just going to kind of go over what we can use the money for. And whatever money we use, we have to report to the Department of Justice how that money is used. So for example, we can use it for the following bullet pointed operations, investigations, detention facilities, joint law enforcement or public safety operations, travel and per diem for law enforcement duties, awards and memorials, drug, gang, and other prevention or awareness programs, matching grants, and the last bullet point is why we're here, and that's to support community-based organizations. Next slide, please. So the Pasadena Police Department is pleased to announce that the availability of asset forfeiture funds for appropriation to community-based nonprofit organizations, which are going to be your 501c3 or 4s, whose stated missions are supportive or consistent with a law enforcement effort, policy, or initiative, is what we're planning on doing. And the Department of Justice equitable sharing only allows us to give up to $25,000. We can't give any more out than that particular amount. We can give, our plan is to give maybe $5,000 to 5 different agencies, depending on how many of the organizations put in for the program. So we'll have to decide that when we see how many organizations are or want to put into this program. Next slide, please. A couple of caveats are that the groups must provide services to the residents of Pasadena. And when we do this program, there is going to be a submission and a selection process that they're going to need to go through. And of note that the categories for submission are these listed: neighborhood safety, crime prevention, drug abuse education, drug prevention services, and reintegration and reentry programs. So their mission, stated mission, or their policies have to be in line with one or more of these categories in order to be eligible for this grant. Next slide, please. The application process is currently underway. Our development of the application process, pardon me, is currently underway. And eventually, when we have that process all set in place, we're going to post it on our Pasadena Police Department website. Once it's ready to go, we'll put out social media campaign, newspaper, discussing with community groups to let them know that this process or this grant program is available. And the link to the PPD, the grant program, will have all the information on how to apply, the application process, what the scoring process is going to be, and all of those issues that are going to come up. So when we do have all the applications, then we're going to do a selection that will be similar to an RFP process. But it will be like a Planet Bids kind of because we're actually giving money out. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a competitive selection process. And the criteria for the selection will all be listed in the application process itself. And in closing, the asset forfeiture community reinvestment grant program is one component of our support for the neighborhoods that we protect and serve. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Lieutenant, for your report. I will recognize Mayor Terry Torrance.
Thank you. I'm a little bit confused. So the assets, if there are assets seized by the Pasadena PD, you said you reported to the feds. Does the money go to the feds, or does the money stay local?
So the money goes to the feds. They take an administrative process fee out of that, which is 20%. And depending on how many agencies were involved in the seizure and the investigation, it could be split from anywhere from one agency to 5, 6, 7 different agencies, so the money shrinks. It can also take up to 2-3 years to get the money back. We are still trying to, we're waiting for the federal government to give us money from 2018. So, you know, it's just a very difficult process, but my approach, if you know me for a while before I was a chief, they do so much for our communities, for those of us that grew up with nonprofits, that you know that there's not enough we could give to them. So this is a start for that.
So Chief, I understood, Lieutenant, that the limit that could be distributed was $25,000, but in a typical year, how much money do we get in terms of asset forfeiture?
It varies year to year. Mayor, so I'll give you an example. Our budget for 2019, if we close it out, is probably roughly 800,000. Half of that is donated, dedicated to capital improvement projects in our jail for cameras, for upgrades, for the council and things that we need. So that's where that goes. So that doesn't leave a whole lot of money when we start to use it for the different educational events internally or trying to upgrade other type of equipment that we may need for the unit and the work that they do. So it goes quickly. So each year we wait for 2020. It hasn't been closed out. It's something we have to wait for the remainder of the year to see how much money that's going to bring in on one end. But secondarily, it may be 2-3 years before we actually see it. So it's almost like the mortgage business. They're kind of always chasing into the future.
But I understand that was a 1 year, but I mean, is it 6 figures typically every year?
Yes, absolutely. We try, and it depends on the type of investigations and again, how many agencies are involved. That's a fair number to put out there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there, Mr. Madison, Councilmember Madison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Lieutenant Sell and Chief, for the report. As you may recall, I think we've talked about this. You know, I was a federal prosecutor when the whole asset forfeiture policy proliferated, and you know, it made for some interesting times. And you know, I think law enforcement agencies, local law enforcement agencies who are eligible for the sharing, have to constantly you know, check themselves in terms of not chasing the money versus, for example, interdicting the actual drugs or whatever the criminal activity is. And I know that we are well aware of that in Pasadena. The chief and I have talked about that. And, you know, sometimes we participate in task forces that result in a portion of asset forfeiture proceeds coming our way. And it's, you know, I think an attorney general once famously said it's poetic justice that if there are proceeds of illegal activity that is disrupted by law enforcement, that those proceeds can be put back into the community to help the local agency and the local community. So just so I'm clear, is this just a total of $25,000 that we're talking about?
Yes, that's the limit the federal government allows. I would like to start having a conversation at the national level and trying to expand that number. Those are old numbers I remember, and I'm a 30-year person removed from that type of work. So I believe it needs to expand and go up from there, but it won't happen without that. But it's $25,000 per year that they allow us to reinvest into our communities. I wish it was 100,000 would be a better amount today. It's a start point.
And is this a new program, this part of it?
Yes, it is a new program. Lieutenant, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is going to be kind of like we're going to have to invent the wheel with this program. So it is going to be our first time with it. There's going to be some bumps in the road, but I think hopefully we'll be able to get this done and give out the money by at least the first of the year.
And this money is intended, it's not just to go to nonprofits in the terms of here's more money. We need to help out nonprofits so where they are in 2021, by 2023, 24, 25, they're better for having received this money to develop their own organizations and build out their initiatives and their platform. So this is not entitled just to give somebody money for a year to pay their rent. It's meant for it to expand for our community to go larger than this.
And the PowerPoint says the mission statements are supportive of, consistent with law enforcement effort, policy, or initiatives. So is that merely sort of like a requirement that's off the side, or is it intended that the funding be directed at some project or initiative that supports law enforcement or some adjunct to law enforcement?
Yes, Councilmember Madison, it has to be the DOJ equitable sharing guide lays out that that has to be part of their mission statement in order to receive this money.
So we would not be thinking about great organizations, but that do work in completely unrelated areas to the prevention of crime and the preservation of safety. We'd be looking at things like maybe, reintegration of parolees. There's some good programs, as we all know, about that, or, perhaps youth activities that somehow relate to helping kids make better choices, about their future, things like that.
That's a big one right there, council member. That's probably maybe the largest initiative we could invest into.
And to kind of sum that kind of broad mission statement has to go along is those categories that I mentioned in slide number 5, which is neighborhood safety, crime prevention, drug abuse education, drug prevention services, and then the last one that you just mentioned, reintegration and reentry programs. Those are the categories that if they do submit, that their mission statement has to be within those categories.
And who will the ultimate decision maker be about the recipients? Does that fall on the chief with all of his other duties?
Yes, that will follow. The ultimate decision will fall on the chief. But what we've decided to do is have a couple people from the police department and some community members be on sort of like a advisory board to go over the submissions, look at the criteria, and pick the ones that best suit our partnership and also the criteria for the grant program.
It's very important to make it a community effort to bring in people. I sit on a couple of community boards, like the Patron Saints, and we have the opportunity to really come together and talk about those in need, even in the nonprofit world. So I want to hear from both sides from this group as to nonprofits in need of help and how we could help, because many nonprofits need the money and they don't know how to apply for these grants. We have to sit down and help them with the applications, help them with this process. So I think we have the ability to help progress and develop many of our nonprofits for the future. Maybe this will help them. A small grant today for $5,000 might help them with a national or state grant in other areas once they know how to do this. And we have a fantastic person in the department, Ingrid, who works out of our special investigations unit, who in fact knows how to obtain grants, look for grants, and help people develop in this area. So we want to use our people to help them get better.
I mean, this is a great opportunity, and I could imagine some opportunities for, matching monies, for example, or, maybe come back to the city and the council would help fund an initiative. I could imagine some partnerships coming out of this with the department. So it is a small step, but it's exciting and important. And I think you should be commended for pursuing it. So thank you very much.
Councilmember.
Any other colleague who would like to ask a question? Hearing none, I would simply say, Lieutenant Sells, you represented the department well, and it's always good to see our up and coming folks. And thank you for your presentation this evening.
Chair, we have one public comment.
Please.
Chris Okerhauser, asset forfeiture or policing for profit as it's called is still in good working form in the Pasadena Police Department. Though condemned by police reformers as picking the pockets of the poor to boost local police budgets, PPD seems to have no shame now offering $25,000 for policing-related grants to local nonprofit as part of the department's effort to polish up their reputation. It's interesting to recall that in 2019, the department took in an astounding $788,000 in asset forfeitures, up from $28,929 in 2018, a profitable venture. Will the Public Safety Committee ever require more than a report on the department's asset forfeiture program? How about calling for the program to shut down? That concludes public comment.
Well, I mean, without responding to all of what the speaker has just said, let me just ask the police chief, aren't you operating under federal law and state law as it relates to asset forfeiture?
Absolutely, but it goes much deeper than that, Chair. This effort of asset forfeiture, we are not interested. Again, this is bad marketing, bad education, bad history. We're not interested in individuals selling drugs in the street and seizing their cars or their bank accounts. This is not that. The counterterrorism world, the area of cartels, they're getting into legalized marijuana. We have some corruption, regionally with elected officials. When I first took the interim chief's job, I did meet with federal officials about concerns regionally with marijuana, other issues, terrorism, and a lot of it points right back to cartels. They are here. They are trying to work this from a legal standpoint as they can. Our responsibility as a community is not to be myopic, but to look beyond that when it comes to our safety. If I just focus on street violence, gang violence, police chiefs are not doing their job. We do have outside entities internationally trying to come into our communities to do what they can in terms of terrorism, active shooters, these other things. So I could end it on this point, is that the asset forfeiture program that they're talking about, it is not the asset forfeiture program of the old days. This has been in development for the last 2.5 years to focus on public safety. The money is just the tools of the trade. We have seized rocket launchers. We have seized other type of weapons. We have seized assault rifles. And we can't really talk much about these investigations because at the same time, we have to protect the officers doing this type of work. I did some of that work for 3 years, 4 years. I understand it. And it's not something we just talk openly about and put people at risk. We don't do that. So it's unfortunate that we try to push down this type of thinking in our community. And we're not looking for brownie points to give out grants. That is not the effort. The person who wrote that comment card obviously doesn't know anything about my history in working for nonprofits since the last riots we had in our community and what we could benefit from. If you want less policing, give me more prevention. Give the nonprofits the ability to expand and do better things. We could help them with that. So there is, in fact, a balance, and it's not an imbalance of how we're doing work. So it's unfortunate, but I understand the concerns. I understand the public comment. I think there's a lot more in terms of education that needs to be done in our profession for society to understand what we are trying to achieve as a community. So I leave it at that.
Chief, it's rarely that I've asked you to do, if I've ever asked you to do what I'm about to ask you. Would you simply do me a favor and give Chris Okerhauser a call, because she is someone who seeks to do good and be upfront of the issue and provide accurate data. And I think you could help her in her thinking because she is a community leader. If you'd commit to that, I'd appreciate it. If you can't,
absolutely. No, we have a working relationship. We talk. We're not disrespectful to one another. So I have no problem at all talking with her and bringing her into the station and talking to her about this process. But it is important.
Chief. And again, thank you, Lieutenant Sells. Any other question, issue for the good of the whole?
I did have a question about the asset forfeiture. I'm supportive of supporting nonprofits with this money. I just wanted to know, Chief, have you looked at potentially using any of these dollars? A while back, we worked with the Crime Stoppers. I forget to put awards for those that may have evidence for crimes that we, I guess, considered. I don't know if they consider cold cases, because I know our guys are still working on them, and they've been working on them for a while, for a long time. But we have some cases where there have been murders where people haven't gotten justice, and I was wondering if I was appreciative of the $5,000 that went towards that, but I think that there was a little bit more significant contributions. There may be more people that came forward to say, what, I actually know who did that, and this is what they did in the time that they did it.
Well, good evening, District 6 and others. We want to welcome you to our District 6 Town Hall. This is the first Town Hall meeting that we've had since the pandemic. So, of course, we're holding the Town Hall through our Zoom. which you've already figured out if you're listening to me. I'm here in my home with Takako Suzuki, our field rep from District 6. And you can see our other panelists tonight are, at least from my left to right, I don't know what you're seeing on your screen, but I've got Police Chief John Perez, City Manager Steve Mermel, and our Public Health Director, Dr. Ying Go, is with us as well. Thank you all for being here. I thought, as we normally do, I would just kick it off. And of course, these are quite unusual times for us, you know, generally, and certainly on the City Council. We've been meeting virtually now for over 4 months since the declaration of emergency and the other orders came down from Sacramento and the governor. And I think that was on March 14th. So we've tried to carry on the business of the City Council and obviously the city as best we could. And I think it's gone well, all things considered. I don't think any of us was prepared for such a devastating pandemic that has affected so many people's health and our economy and really all of the things that we do in our lives so drastically. We, at the council, you know, in addition to sort of with obviously the help of our great staff, some of whom are before you tonight, we've tried to continue to provide the best possible service that we can as a city municipal services organization. We adopted our budget for the fiscal year ending next June 2021. We are in an election cycle, so certainly the city clerk has been occupied with all things related to the election and probably some big question marks about what that will look like depending on the arc of the pandemic. But I think more specifically, you know, we've been trying to address through our public health department the sort of public health impacts of the pandemic. And then at the council, working with the staff, we've been working hard trying to mitigate as much as we can of the economic devastation and damage. And I think in both cases, we've got a lot to be proud of. You know, in terms of our public health, it's great that we have a public health department. We're one of only 3 cities in the state that does. There's a 4th city that sort of claims to have a public health department, but it's really more of an environmental office. But in terms of what I think we all think of as public health, led by a physician who is an expert in public health, it's really us and Berkeley and Long Beach are the only 3 cities. The other populations in our state rely on the county public health directors. And as I understand under state law, and I've had to learn a lot more about this than I knew before, but each county is required to have a county public health department and director. And of course, then there's a state public health department and director. And those persons have been extremely important, as has the municipal health department here in Pasadena with Dr. Go and her team. We early on at the city manager and Dr. Go's recommendation, working closely with Huntington Hospital, our only hospital in Pasadena anymore, we established a temporary hospital facility at the convention center. So as we saw those cases really rising and the hospitalizations and tragically fatalities as well, we were prepared for even more cases than Huntington would be able to handle if necessary. We also provided some temporary trailer residential units down around the Rose Bowl to be able to offer to public employees who, for example, had to quarantine, or public health workers who might, again, have to quarantine or have to use temporary housing. So I've been overall pretty proud of our efforts in terms of the pandemic. I'll invite, when it's their turn, you know, comments from the public health director and the city manager, and of course the chief about that as well. In terms of the economics, you know, the economics are equally devastating, frankly. Obviously not to families that have suffered a fatality or a severe illness and hospitalization, but certainly for many, many families and individuals, this has really dealt the economy a knockout blow. And so we've tried, again, very hard at City Council to try to provide scaffolding to those elements of our economy that really, really need it. And I think we're talking here about things like the meals program that we rolled out very early on, where we funded hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to provide meals to those who needed it because of a loss of income occasioned by the pandemic. We've rolled out a grant program for small businesses, which would be intended to be grant funds that they could use to stay in business and continue to provide paychecks to their employees and the like. We've tried to help the restaurateurs in Pasadena, a very important part of our local economy, with some modifications to when and how we allow outdoor dining to take place and outdoor seating. You may have noticed around town some parklets and bollards going up on certain lanes of traffic and the like, and more sidewalk dining than you would normally be used to seeing. And that's all driven by the fact that when we're in closure, as we are now, the indoor dining is not an option for our consumers or residents or the restaurants. So we want to allow them to do, in addition to to-go dining, also to be able to serve people outdoors. And I think, the jury is still out on that, but I think it's going as well as could be expected so far. And we've done some other things. We imposed an eviction moratorium to prevent any evictions from happening during this time. We're offering actually direct rental assistance now to persons who may need a helping hand, again, because of the economic damages that have been imposed by the pandemic. So again, we may not have done everything perfectly, but I think we've done a really great job in terms of these initiatives. And I know that certainly myself and all of my colleagues, really care deeply about kind of these twin threats, the public health threat and then the threat to our economy and our quality of life, with schools being closed and all the rest. 2020 sadly is going down as sort of the year that never was in many respects. So that's what we've been working on, as you would imagine, and maybe that would be a good segue to start our panel discussion. And thought maybe Dr. Go, you could go first and give us an update from your perspective on how we're faring.
Thank you, Councilmember Madison. Good evening, everybody. I see the lighting is a little bit funny. Can I share my screen? I have to have just a couple slides.
Certainly. Are you able to grab the share screen there? Perfect.
It's working? Okay, great. So certainly we are all in this together. I'm happy to share some updates on COVID-19, but I also just wanted to mention first off just how hard your public health department is working. I have an incredible staff who I can only describe as truly intrepid and selfless in the work that they've been doing to protect us all to the greatest extent possible from really this serious threat. And although we prepare and have prepared for at least a decade every year for emergencies such as this, it is true that we could not have known that this was the year that it would be we would be faced with such a great challenge all across the globe. And so we are happy to be here to serve, and truly our public health nurses, our epidemiologists, our staff, our environmental health inspectors, everyone has been pulling together, working overtime, really giving it everything they can to our community, and I'm so proud of them. Let me see how to forward this. There we go. So this is real and sobering map. I'm sorry that the data is correct on there. So the United States is at 3.5 million cases and about 137,000 deaths. And you can see in this hot heat map where the cases are concentrated. And in the beginning, it really was concentrated on the east and west coasts. And as you can see, the spread has been throughout the country and in the south as well, particularly hard hit, some of the hotspots. And this is the dashboard that's provided by the state of California Public Health Department. That is a statewide a total of almost 350,000 cases, over 7,000 deaths, unfortunately. And that LA County at 140,000 or so usually makes up about almost half of the cases and almost half of the deaths in the state. They provide demographics on their dashboard. It's about half female, half male. And we do know that we're seeing 60% here of all the cases in the state among a younger demographic, 18 to 49-year-olds. And of all the races, the Latino population make up 55% of the cases. And we've been seeing really steep increases in the rate of cases among that racial group in particular. Both African Americans and Latinos are disproportionately affected as far as infections or cases of COVID-19 across the country, across the state, and in Pasadena as well. This is a snapshot from our dashboard, and I invite you to look at our dashboard. We're making a few changes. I think we added some more information today that might be of interest to folks. And so we provide the laboratory confirmed cases. We provide the confirmed deaths that are associated with COVID. And the curve here you can see of cumulative cases looks pretty steady as far as growth, but you can see that there was a slight flattening here in between May and June, and then started really to take off again. And that's what we've seen over the past 4 weeks, starting Memorial Day weekend, really, an increase in the rate of our daily new cases. And also we are this week seeing the effects of 4th of July weekend and seeing another bump in our cases, daily new cases, because of presumably, based on our case investigations, activities between households during the 4th of July. We also provide gender and race breakdown, and it reflects the same patterns that I mentioned in the California data, although we have slightly more females than male cases. And I think that might reflect our older age demographic and the fact that women tend to have longer life expectancy than men. And then this graph, a lot of lines here. The red one, so the good thing to look at is the red one, which is Pasadena. And we can see that the increase in what we call the 7-day average of the number of new cases each day, down depending on lab reporting or different number of people getting tests on a certain day. So to smooth that out, we do a 7-day average. And we look at this steady increase starting in the middle of June, so over the past 4 weeks, in the number of new cases adjusted for population. However, you can also see that some of our surrounding counties and jurisdictions have had a steeper increase, and ours has been a little bit slower, which is positive news. So there are a lot of common questions that we get, and the answers keep changing because this is a novel virus, and the ways we test and treat this virus are constantly evolving and changing. And so I wanted to cover the topic of testing. There are basically 3 types of tests, 2 types of collections. So the first category is a swab. Usually it's a nasal swab or an oral swab. There is also a saliva test that now has FDA emergency use approval. And the gold standard diagnostic test is something called a PCR. And that is the test that's being done. It's a molecular test, and that's the test that tests for, that identifies the RNA of the COVID-19 virus, which is called SARS-CoV-2. And that test is the one that they're doing at all these at doctor's offices, at the hospitals, and also at the public testing sites in the county. The second test is newer. There are 2 types that have been approved, or 2 companies that have approved antigen tests now, and many, many companies, including local labs, that have the PCR test approved. But the antigen test I want to point out, because I don't want people to get confused about what the test results tell you. It's a rapid test.